And yeah, no, you do get more self-conscious when videos are involved, don't you? So
yeah, well, I've been doing a lot of this for work, like these kind of conversations. So
right,
yeah, it'll all be good.
Yeah. But then eventually, the amount of discharge when I did pull out was enough to feed a small infant for a week, I would say. Hello, and welcome to a new show. Isn't this exciting? This is Literary as Feck with me, Clive Davis, and who are you, sir?
This is me, Nicholas O'Sheacon. But we're going to go with Nick, I think, because that's easier to say.
The Nicholas O'Sheacon.
Yes, that is the Gaelic version of my name, or the Irish language version of my name.
It also sounds like a Comic Con for like leprechauns.
Yes, I believe it is in the west of Ireland, yes.
Right. I would go there. I guess they discuss pots of the best pot to hold your gold in and such.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So what kind of shillelagh is best for hitting people in the face with? But that's perfect, actually, because we are coming up very soon to St. Patrick's Day. And as we see when we get into my side of things, I have a very related set of books that are all kind of connected to those very issues.
There was recently they released a couple of years ago. There was a new film in the Leprechaun series as well.
Oh, did it have Warwick Davis, or did he come back?
I'm not sure, actually. I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a cracking anecdote. So if it all goes if it all goes this well,
yes, yeah. Well, it'll be, we'll be hitting 1 million views within 3 days.
Yeah. Right. So we're here to talk books, and just to give you a bit of background. So Nick and myself I've been trying to do this for a little while, and our initial concept was to choose a book or two and then both read it and discuss it. But it turns out that this incredibly complex concept was beyond both of us. We couldn't quite get it together.
The whole book club thing just wasn't happening.
No. So
Yeah.
So of course it would be a crime against humanity to deprive you all of our book talk.
Digital company.
Yeah, digital company. There we go. So we decided, why not just what we've been reading in the past couple of weeks. So the idea is maybe do this every 2-3 weeks, something like that, time permitting, and just catch each other up on what we've been reading, and that's it, pretty much. Loose concept.
Presuming I can continue to read at a reasonable pace, but we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, well, it goes for both. So yeah, this is very experimental.
It is spring break right now, so I'm hoping to get a couple of things under my belt before the end of the week, so I'll have something to talk about next time.
Before you go to Fort Lauderdale.
Yes. Especially now, what with the COVID, it's a particularly exciting time to bring your beads down and breathe in the faces of other people.
One crazy Corona vacation. Right.
So you're going to start us off, right?
Yeah. Well,
and your concept is to start with things you've bailed on, books that you attempted to get into or get through, and were just like, you threw up your hands and said, nope, exactly. Not for me.
Yes. Okay. So you don't have any in this category this time, do you?
I do actually have something, but I'd like to. I'm going to finish it and actually bring it to the next one. I started reading a book that my wife had recommended, and but I do intend to finish it, so I'm going to.
Okay.
I'll bring it up next time.
Yeah, no, it's just I thought sometimes it's almost as interesting to consider why you couldn't finish something. All right, here we go then. Without further ado, so the first one I bailed on. This is Christopher Hill's The World Turned Upside Down, and it's got quite a nice cover. I'm not sure. Again, we're in the experimental stages here. So in the edit, I've either edited in a larger shot of this, or you're all squinting to try and look at it. And this is a radical.
A nice medieval looking thing.
Yeah, radical ideas during the English Revolution. And it is a lovely cover, actually. I do really like the cover, and I'm so well organized. I actually forgot to look up who the artist is, but here we go. It's a cover engraving. It doesn't actually say who it is. I suppose it's an unknown. JT by JT, 1647.
Okay.
I like the engraving. Now, so are you familiar with this at all, Nick?
No, and I don't know who Christopher Hill is either. So elucidate.
He's a historian, and that's about all I know about him, really. But this very well considered, and particularly this book is considered a classic. This is apparently the go-to book about English Civil War era, radical thinking, and as the title suggests, the world turned upside down, right? And I've been wanting to read this book for years and years and years, but it was actually out of print, and the only copies I could find online were ridiculously overpriced. But Penguin have just re-released it, so this is a relatively new release, just earlier this year. And so I was very, very, very excited to read this, because it's a period of time I don't really know much about, but it's kind of fascinating.
Can you give me the years, because it's been a while since I've done much reading about British history. What roughly is the time period of the English Civil War?
Well, I'm glad you you asked me that, Nick, because of course I know.
You have that information at hand.
Yes. Well, I don't know the exact dates, but isn't it mid 17th century?
I guess what I'm wondering is am I right in thinking that this is the time of like the levelers and those kind of
yes
those kind of groups? Okay, all right.
Yes, yeah. So
that's kind of utopian.
Right, and I thought this book would be my kind of primer, and it was going to open up all sorts of other, and I'd go off and read this and read that, and so sometimes you just have high expectations, and things have such a I just thought it would be my doorway into that realm. And I'm not saying that the information isn't there. The information is here. It's definitely in here, but it's dry as dust on toast. I mean, it's really, really difficult to get along with, and consequently, none of the information sticks.
Yep. It's funny how style is something that a lot of academics don't seem to understand is a really key part of, especially writing history. I mean, I know that there's popular history versus history, but even so, No, I know. There's no reason things have to be boring.
No, and the thing is, it's not exactly that it's. How can I say? It's not exactly that it's, but it's not dense exactly or anything like that. It's just, I don't know. It's very difficult to put your finger on it. It's just, it doesn't stick. Like, I'll read 10 pages, and it's not that I've been struggling with 10 pages. It's just 10 minutes. If you came into the bath and asked me, what have you just been reading? I couldn't tell you.
And that would be where you'd be doing your reading, in the bath?
Yes, my non-digital reading is often in the bath.
Okay, so is mine. That's funny. I don't know if we've already talked about that before, but quite a bit of my reading is done in the bath as well.
Yeah, yeah. I like a good long, I'll be in there between 30 minutes and an hour sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes it's stiff stone cold by the time I get out. Sometimes I drain it and I just sit in the bathtub and read another 20, 30 minutes. And my wife is deeply confused when she walks in and I'm sitting in an empty bathtub with a book.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a little strange. So are you sitting shivering in the cold naked with a book?
No, the ambient temperature is fairly comfortable here. If you've kept the door closed anyway. This is an extraneous side.
No, I'm just curious.
So how far?
Because for me, it's while I'm planning to have a bath anyway. I'm going to have a bath, and then to multitask, to read while in the bath, because what else are you going to do in the bath? And the two go together nicely. But it sounds almost as if for you, the act of sitting, do you sometimes sit in the bath with your clothes on just to read?
No.
Okay,
It's almost always takes place after I've had a full bath, and sometimes I'll tend to add more hot water, or the bath will have been so hot that I'll actually need to drain it just to cool down, for fear of scalding myself or boiling myself. And
right.
then but then I'll still be enjoying the read, and I want to continue the read, and so therefore stay in the empty tub for a while,
Right.
just
Wow, interesting.
reading.
Did you get your habit of bathing and reading when you were here in Japan, or were you doing it before? Because Nick used to live.
I have no doubt.
Nick used to live here.
Yeah, I have no doubt that I did it all the time, but I certainly developed a greater appreciation for bathtubs that kept a consistent temperature. There was one in the school where Jen was working, and we ended up living for a short time. They had a proper, like, you took the wooden slats off the top and you sat into that kind of deep jacuzzi style, bath. And and I can remember reading like Edogawa Rampo stories, and various, I think I read Abe Kobo's, a couple of his books in that bathtub. Right. It was a nice atmosphere to read. Books get a bit wrinkly though in that kind of a sauna environment.
Right. Well, we all get wrinkly, Nick. It's unavoidable. Right. And the other thing as well, the one I struggle with is, because it's an etiquette issue, is reading in an onsen, a hot springs.
Okay.
Like, have you ever attempted this?
No, I don't think I've ever brought a book to a bathhouse.
Because it's quite, especially I wouldn't try and read it inside, but if they have a rotempura, an outside hot springs.
Oh yeah. I mean, I can see that would be very relaxing.
But the problem is, well, there's a number of problems. One is, so if you go in, this is all very interesting, I'm sure, but when you get in the bath, it's very easy in your own bath to control the environment, that you just step in and you hold the book, and then when you step out, you don't get the book wet. But at a hot springs, if there's no room around the edge, for example, you're not going to be plonked in the middle, and then and then you have to consider taking a small towel to dry your. So plus as well, I don't know if some people would frown upon you bringing, because some people are very hygiene obsessed, and with the hot springs you usually shower and everything before you enter. So something people who have,
and you don't know where those trees have been that provided the paper for the book. So
this is I've never noticed anyone else bringing a book or anything else in.
I don't think I've ever seen it. I don't think I've ever seen it either, actually, now that you mention it. I don't. Yeah. But anyway, so how far did you get into this book before you scarpered?
Right. Good. Keeping us on point there. 50 pages.
Okay, that's not bad. I mean, I feel like you give it enough of a chance.
Yeah, I'm just counting how many pages. Fucking hell, there's a lot of notes. There's like, how many pages of notes is that? That's like, wow, there's about 100 of these pages almost are notes, end notes.
Okay.
So it's 324 pages, and I did 50. So yeah, I did more of it than I thought. But but no, it's the other problem I had with it, and this is my problem rather than the book's problem, was I was expecting a real primer about the whole time period and the English Civil War, and how it related to all these groups, like you said, the Diggers and the Levelers and Winstanley and all that stuff. But from the beginning, it's almost, it's like, well, we all know that stuff. There's no need to get into all that stuff that we all know. And you're overestimating my knowledge here, Chris.
The background knowledge you're bringing,
Yeah, so I think I might need to read some other books, and then I might give it another shot. I mean, it's entirely possible that if you have a bit more background, it might not be quite as, sometimes if you don't know anything about a subject, it just bounces off you, right? But then
Yes,
if you know a little bit, then the devil's in the details, right? And you start to appreciate it.
Yeah,
so,
you create that, I think it's called stickiness. You create that kind of a place for that information to kind of attach itself to, right? If you've got a framework, without a framework, it's very hard to attach anything.
Is that what it's called? Stickiness?
I don't know. I think I've heard that term used, but I don't know if it's related to that. But yeah, I think with education, we talk about stickiness.
Okay.
In a non-gross sense.
Right. Yes.
I mean, children can be sticky for snot-related reasons and other things, but yes.
Yeah.
But
sticky children talk is for that other podcast we do on the deep web.
Yes. I'm going to be in trouble. Go on.
So so that's it. I mean, it's just again, I'm going to try it again one day, I think, but that one day will be a long way away, I think. So I'll keep it in my reference library, and so it makes me look clever. But whether I'll actually finish it, I don't know. So the next one I unfinished, very brief, is digital. So insert cover here, because I read a Kindle, and it was the third in the Executioner or Mac Bolan series.
Yes. I would love to read those books.
Yeah.
I don't think there was any glam rock action series that I'm aware of.
Right. Yes, he gets back just in time from assassinating someone in Egypt to do the Wolverhampton gig with T-Rex or something.
Yeah, we should write that now, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I'd read that. You could create a whole
glitter executioner
universe, kind of like the John Wick universe, but with rock stars who commit crimes and soldiers of fortune and stuff.
Yeah. I could easily see Brian Ferry for sure.
Yeah, he's a dodgy looking fellow, all right.
Yeah. Anyway. Yes, Mac Bolan.
Are you familiar with the Executioner? There's a men's adventure series, right?
I've seen the covers many times in secondhand bookshops and stuff, where they'll have 50 of them in a row.
Yes.
But I don't think I've ever read any of them. No.
Yeah, I think
they'll usually be near the Able Team and like other similar kind of
Right. Well, I think Able Team is a spin-off from that series.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, and there's like 200 of them or something, and mostly actually written by the same guy as well, as opposed to its name.
It's not just a team of wow.
Yeah, but I'm brief about this because number one, I didn't finish it, and number two, I mean, there's a lot of stuff online about it's one of the most popular of the men's adventures, and as such, I really wanted to get into it because, especially the first book in the series, The War Against the Mafia, it's clearly a blueprint for like Punisher, and it really reminded me of the movie The Exterminator as well.
Okay.
So
interesting.
So it was kind of like, I'm gonna enjoy this kind of. But I would say that the three that I read the first one almost to completion, gave up. Second one didn't get very far into it, and this third one I decided, because I got a Kindle bundle of the first three, that would be cheaper, and I've decided to give up on the series because they're not quite trashy enough. But then on the other hand, they're not exactly particularly great books.
They're not good enough yet either.
So it falls between two stools.
Yes. I mean, like, whereas something like the Parker series is just really good. The books themselves are really good, and there's a level of meanness and a certain level of trashiness as well. It's the whole package.
Yes. On the other end of the spectrum, I was thinking of that book that you lent me many years ago. Is it an Iceberg Slim one? Death Wish.
Yes.
It's called.
Yes. Which is strange because it's one of the few that's not about African American. Or no, it is kind of right, but it's about the mafia as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
And, and that's super.
Would have made a great Fred Williamson movie.
It would, yeah. Fred Williamson.
I always thought like it was a missed opportunity exactly for an awesome, Euro trash kind of.
And is Lindsay dead?
Yes.
There we
sadly.
go.
Yes.
And Bruno Mattei is gone as well. So.
Right, and didn't John Saxon passed away recently as well?
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, so
Fred's still about.
Yes, yeah. But maybe a bit long in the tooth. But anyway, so yeah, that was another one you bailed on the series, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I can't imagine unless, of course. So the way I've learned to approach these kind of books recently is. It doesn't count for this series because they were mostly written by the same guy, but when you have these ridiculously long kind of series and a series of kind of house names, is to find out who the individual authors are and find individual authors you like, and then just start by the ones written by authors that you like, right? And then you might have a way in.
I mean, you kind of
go,
Yeah, and I would that makes sense to me. It's in the same way that if there's a band who has a ridiculously dense discography, it helps to go to some kind of best of lists, compiled by fans who will be like, well, this is where to start, and maybe part one isn't where to start, maybe album one isn't where to start, maybe book one is not where you start. Right. Maybe you start with book 15.
Yeah, and yes, exactly. Yeah, you need to go to but in the case of The Executioner, the first one is considered like one of the best in the series and all that. So it's clearly not for me. So we got two more unfinished. So this one, which has an amazing cover. I probably will have to edit this in just to because it just seems a shame to be looking at it like this. But this is I'm going to see. Dark City, the Lost World of Film Noir.
Okay, so this is some nonfiction. You're because that's something I haven't really done. I haven't been reading much nonfiction actually in quite a while, but that's something to
and
put away in the back of my mind for future.
And that cover photo is from the film Dead Reckoning, which I haven't actually seen that particular one, but it's such a striking. I mean, obviously it's from a film or a film still, but it's a beautiful composition with the people in the car and the world, and it's an unusual shape as well. The book.
Yep.
And I'm a big film noir fan, I have to admit. Are you a film noir guy?
I mean, not exhaustively, but what I've seen, I've liked. I think I've seen several of the better known, right? But it's not something I've dived hugely deeply into, or it'll also depend on if there's specific actors. Like I've seen everything that Bogart made, for example, or I've seen anything that Peter Lorre is in, or Sidney Greenstreet, or there's certain people who I kind of follow to their
right.
Yeah,
no, it's a fascinating, and there's a surprisingly large amount of them. And this book again, and it's got lots of nice illustrations and photos, and it's written by this guy Eddie Muller, who also co-wrote a book called Grindhouse, which was kind of like a history of particularly the early years of exploitation are covered really well. So you've got stuff like Dwayne Esper and Maniac and stuff from the 50s and the road show pictures and all that. It's a good book. However, this one, so I thought, well, him, and he's written a book about film noir, that'll be perfect. I'll be able to bathe a lot while reading this book, I thought. But it's, I don't know, I don't know where you stand with film books, Nick, but I'm not a big fan of books that give over a lot of their coverage to telling you the plot.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't see the point at all, because if you've seen the
Right.
movie,
you
know
know
what happens.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you haven't, you don't want that to be the way you
Right.
find out the story.
Exactly. So there's a lot
it's redundant.
of kind of run on, like, not so much the exhaustive on one film, but it'll be so the chapters are thematically linked. So, you know, you'll have this films in this environment, that environment, and then it'll just cluster together, and in this film, and then there's lots of long kind of paragraphs of just telling you, you know, what happens in a whole bunch of films.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really make for very entertaining reading for me. Like, I'm more interested in either placing those films in a larger context, or kind of reviewing elements of the film, or you know, it's a
funnily for me, what I enjoy most is information about the actual production.
And that as
I
well,
really enjoy learning about weird stuff that went on the set, or that way that the actors interacted with each other, you know, or just the process of the writing. What, you know, all that stuff is far more interesting to me than maybe just even the film criticism piece. Depending on how good the criticism is, I don't mind it, but I'm often mostly interested actually in the means of production. Like, how did this thing, who thought it up, you know, how did the actors get cast?
The means of production, like the good little communist that you are.
Exactly.
Right.
My main concern is, how were the workers treated?
Yes.
Was it a union job?
So again, it's difficult to, I mean, I just brought it up, just more than anything, I want to show the beautiful cover.
Yes, cover.
It's just, it's difficult for me to get on with this kind of book. In a way, you can't really fault it. It does kind of what it says it does. It does tell you all about
right.
So I can't really fault it, but I won't be finishing it, just because it just feels I've wasted 20-30 minutes. Like, when I've, you know, been in the bath, and I'm like, wow, I didn't really learn much, or, you know. So sometimes you just have to force yourself to move on, I guess. And then so finally, in the unfinished section, and this is a real shame, because this is something I really, really, really did want to like, and had been sat on my shelf for a long time. White Zombie.
Okay, so
Anatomy
this is
of
just about the movie.
Yes, it's an entire book.
Okay. It's fairly dense looking as well.
Yes.
That's impressive.
About the 1932 film White Zombie, which I'm assuming you've seen.
Ages and ages ago, I barely remember any of those. I Walked with a Zombie, that kind of race of early kind of black and white, you know, Caribbean voodoo-based zombie movies. I saw them all. I all saw them all at the same time, in my late teens, early 20s, and I haven't come back to any of them. So
right, great film, Bela Lugosi, of course, and just
revisit.
atmosphere, like, you can cut it with a knife. Like, it's one of my favorites, I have to say, and an entire book on it may sound excessive, but I kind of have a fondness for, you know, books that are myopic in their interest.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So and the thing is, there's everything about this movie is fascinating as well. In terms, you got Bella in it for a start, and you've got the Halperins who made it. They're fascinating. It's got this amazing voodoo music score, and it's based on a really interesting book, and everything about it should be fascinating, because you're talking early 20th century, and, you know, issues of race and how it's depicted on film, and it goes into all the elements that inspired the film, like stage music, stage productions, and other books, and so on. It should be catnip for me.
Right.
this should be like one of my favorite, comfort reading book, something I would read again and again in the bath,
Right.
just to enjoy the details.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, and again, I'm not very good at articulating precisely why these things are, but just doesn't work.
Doesn't grab you.
No, Gary Rhodes as well as that he's got the info's there, much like Christopher Hill, but it's I don't
sometimes
know.
It is an issue of style more than anything else. It's just an issue of how somebody puts a line down.
Yeah,
There are some people who just who write in such a way that the book almost reads itself, and then there's people where I feel like I'm bringing too much of myself, I'm doing too much of the work, to slog through something.
And it really is alchemy, isn't it? Because you can criticize something to a certain extent, but after a point, well, for me anyway, you might be better at this than me, but I'm just not very good at articulating what my problem is exactly. Just that I have one.
Right. Well.
Yeah. But still, I'm glad I own a copy of it. It's quite a nice thing to have. Like, for instance, if I ever do have a pressing question about White Zombie, I know where to go. I mean,
yes,
it'll be in here. I mean, if it's not in here, I don't know where else it would be.
Right.
But it's not quite I mean, let's put it this way then, to make this a public, service. If you're as excited about the concept of an entire book about White Zombie as I am, beware, you might be let down.
Right. Okay. I'm trying to think if I have many books here that are, book length treatments of. I have a few like of single albums. There's that 33 1/3, whatever that series of fairly slim volumes, right? But they deal with a single album. But I do have Last House on the Left book here, which is just that's all it is. It's just Last House on the Left. It's quite good actually. See if I can. Might be back here. But I'm trying to. I don't know if I have. Actually, it was a Fab. It was a Fab Press book. Yeah. And I remember enjoying this when I read it. It's been ages, but I remember reading it cover to cover.
I'd like to read that, I think, actually, because it's a film that fascinates me.
Yeah, I think it might be the only book I've got that covers one movie in a huge depth. Years ago, I read a great book, which I don't know if it's in print anymore, but I took it out of the university library when I was a student at the University of Victoria, and it was just El Topo.
Oh,
and it was really, really good, very entertaining. It was. I won't go into any more than that, but I would recommend it. It's good.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm trying to think. There were more books at the, at university libraries that tended to have. You would find a book that was just this film, but I'm trying to. Yeah, I don't know if I have any. I started certain directors. Like I got the huge book on Sergio Leone, but it's his entire career. It's not just a fistful of dollars or something.
There is that one Carl Gottlieb wrote about the making of Jaws. Apparently that's pretty good. Yeah, nothing else springs to mind. I mean, there's so many films, especially films that maybe don't survive in their complete form, or it would be nice to have, an alternative, like if there was a book all about everything we know about London After Midnight, for example.
Okay.
We're probably never going to get to see that.
Like those Doctor Who telesnap things that they put together after
exactly, yeah.
After the BBC binned all of those Doctor Who episodes, and then people put them back together from photographs taken off the television.
Yeah, because they taped over it with the fucking Queen's Jubilee or something.
Well, yes, yeah.
Because there's a book about Doctor Who that Kim Newman wrote, and there's quite a lot in there on one of the famous lost episodes, one of the Troughton era ones, I think, the Macra Terror, which is the giant lobster episode. And Kim Newman saw it when it was originally transmitted when he was a kid. So it's quite interesting to hear his memories.
That's one of the ones that's been animated and has been re-released as a, and it's quite good. I mean, those reanimated, those animated versions of those old serials are quite well done. But anyway, we're again reviewing.
Yes, well,
away from books.
Since we'll be doing that quite a bit. So that's the unfinished section out the way.
Okay.
So I believe we each have about 4 books, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's ping pong back and forth. So you go ahead, Nick, and tell us about your first book.
The first book I have for us today is called The Tane. It's by Thomas Kinsella, but it's not by Thomas Kinsella. It is a translation of the ancient Irish kind of. Nobody really knows actually how old it is because it wasn't written down until around the year 600 to 700, kind of by Christian monks. But it's much older. It's believed to be, maybe 2,000 years old, maybe older than that. It's probably, in fact, the first.
It's in good condition.
It looks great. It's probably really the first Irish myth cycle. Now there is I'll get into this a little bit later when I talk about another couple of books, but there is a myth cycle that takes place historically before this, but I believe it was composed afterwards. So this is really the beginning of Irish mythology. So to explain why I even found this book in the first place, I read this first at about age 11 or 12. I took it out of the Wicklow Public Library. That's where I lived. I lived in Wicklow town at the time, which is a seaside village in the east of Ireland.
Was this the same edition?
Yes, it might have been a hardcover, but it was exactly the same. It's this one. I mean, this one is, I'm trying to think here, published in 1969 originally. Well, this is a reprint from '88, but this one with these some French man did these kind of interesting pen and almost like Rorschach blot illustrations of the story, which are kind of nice. Yeah. They add an extra element to it. They're like really simple, but they do work.
Yeah, they look like something you might find on the side of the pot or something. That you pull out.
And I quite like the ones like this where they're just these intense battle scenes with thousands of tiny people running around and killing each other. Are pretty cool. So so growing up in like 1980s rural Ireland, there wasn't an awful lot to be proud of. Like, I didn't grow up feeling like, yes, that sense of nationalism that a lot of Irish people seem to come by somehow. I grew up feeling like this place sucks. Like, I looked out at the gray kind of sea and I imagined vistas beyond Ireland. I mean, I think
Wales.
If my parents hadn't, yes, it was that would have been the direction I was looking. Sellafield, I think I was looking out towards Sellafield.
The land of bounty, just across the Irish Sea.
So yeah, is the Sellafield right? Is that where they were pumping all of the nuclear waste into the Irish Sea, or is that what was that?
Sellafield, yeah. I just remember when I was in school, there was the joke. What's got 200 feet and glows in the dark? Sellafield Primary School. Bada boom.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So basically, when you grow up in, and I'm sure you can probably relate to this somewhat, but when you grow up in a place like small town Ireland, and the majority of the culture that you kind of take in is either American, right? Most of the movies I watched, in the cinema were American, or they were like, it was English stuff. It was British television. It was and it was American television. And the only time I ever saw myself or like Irish people represented was as like ridiculous stereotypes, like a pig under the arm and like a wink and stealing somebody's ladder, kind of like that's
right.
That's all I ever saw. And so my feeling was like, being Irish sucks, and also it did, because it was tremendously economically depressed at the time. The town I grew up in, like the main radiator factory that employed like 70% of the men in the town had shut down after a protracted strike in the mid 80s, and just everyone was out of work and miserable, and it rained all the time. And so the whole, I was just like disinterested in anything that was Irish. And so, but I was really interested in 2000 AD, the British comic, right? And was a huge fan of Judge Dredd and all that stuff. And the thing that got me excited about Ireland at all was the character Slane McGrath, who is a, hang on, I'm just gonna tell Alexa to shut up. Alexa, off. Sorry, she's telling me to go to bed. I have a robot that tells me to go to bed.
Yes.
So
you need one to tell you when to get out the bath as well.
I should ask her about that. Set an alarm, please. But
Dave.
So
it's cold, Dave. Time to come out, Dave.
Actually, this is a great connection. When I was a kid, I read this because she keeps asking me like to teach me her voice so that she can use my name, and I will not have that. I won't have her knowing my voice or calling me by name. And it comes back to this comic that was in 2000 AD. It might have been in an annual, one of the like. This is again something that I think North Americans don't have any context for, but that there was this hardcover version of, and the fact that the comics were published weekly and not monthly as well, and at a bigger magazine size and on filthy newsprint in black and white at that point. But anyway, the annual was a great story in the 2000 AD annual about this computerized house where the system had fallen in love with the owner and shuts all the doors and won't let them out, and they starve to death.
I read it as well.
It left a lasting impression.
Thags, Future Shocks.
Future Shocks.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, it would have been. It left such a lasting impression that I will not have anything to do with her knowing my name or getting to know me or, you know.
Isn't there an episode of not Hammer House of Horror, the Hammer's House of Mystery and Suspense or whatever it's called, if you remember that series? I think there's one of those episodes which is something along those lines as well, like a computerized house or something.
So anyway, I'm having nothing to do with that. Right. So basically, reading, so there was this character that was created by Pat Mills, and I'll be coming back to this later because I've been rereading those as well recently, called Slane McGrath, who was a Celtic barbarian, and that was strangely, that was how I took some pride in being Irish, was in this invented comic book character coming out of England, although Pat Mills is himself of an Irish Catholic English family, like he's like second generation or whatever. Right. So yeah, and in that story, I mean, I know you've read Slane, you're aware. So, you know, Slane is based on Cuchulainn, who is this kind of hero of Irish mythology. And Pat Mills has always been very clear about that. So I think I was probably reading an interview with Pat Mills in a 2000 AD annual where he said, you know, if you're interested, you should really read The Tane. That's where I've taken a certain amount of the stuff from. So I went to the library and grabbed this. And what's interesting about this is there's been recently a newer translation. Just a couple of years ago, Kieran Carson did another translation, which I actually prefer. I think it's not that it's more, this is still very readable. But what's interesting is there's been this process over the years. So I'm going to go right back to here. This is Lady Augusta Gregory's, she, back in, I think, 1902, really produced the first translation into modern English of the Cuchulainn stories.
She put them all. Yates, is it?
Yes, yeah. She was friends of Yates, and Yates was a huge fan of that. Her version of the Cuchulainn stories. He used them to do, I think, 4 or 5 plays based on the Cuchulainn myth cycle.
Right. Yeats is one of those figures I find kind of, I don't know much about, but I think I would like to know more about him. A few years back, I went to this little event that a friend of mine put on, which was all about how Yeats had written a few plays based on what he thought Japanese no plays were like. So
Awesome.
they did like this reading of sections from a Yeats play, and then someone came on and did like a no presentation, which I'd never seen. Yeah, which I'd never seen before. They were proper no performers, but no is such a I mean, because it's so ritualistic, right? Like everything about it is so ritualized. The movements and you know, there's no cutting corners, or like you have to do things in such a precise way. But it becomes almost hypnotic in its ritual.
Oh yeah,
nature.
I also think it's kind of like the noise music of like drama.
Right.
In that like everything is like, in the way if you like listen to an album, it's just like washing kind of like noise, and then suddenly something happens, like you've listened to 20 minutes of like kind of static washes, then suddenly, and then you're like, whoa, like it kind of magnifies that moment a millionfold, right? And it's the same as like the first time I read Journey to the End of the Night. There's a moment where somebody does or says something nice in that book, and it's in amongst a litany of endless awfulness, and it makes that moment so much more powerful than if it had been kind of a saccharine. It's barely, you know, but yeah, it's just it's interesting that you could do it by creating this thing where you've created a wash of one color, and then just by adding that little moment. So no, for me is like that. By when things happen, you're really.
I guess someone just says, "Would you like a cup of tea or something?" It's yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Only to throw the cup of scalding tea in the face the next minute. Yeah.
So I think that Lady Gregory, she gets a bum rap. I feel. I think she actually did a very good job of taking the stories and writing them in. She did this kind of thing where she invented this, or adapted these Irish, I guess, vocal structures, like the way that Irish people speak. She used that to kind of create her translations, so that it's very readable, although it's weird. It reads the way Irish people in the countryside spoke 100 years ago, but it seems quite natural to me. Like it feels authentic when you read it.
Is it akin to like the way Irvin Welsh writes Scottish?
Yeah,
sense?
A little bit, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Probably not so much play with spelling, maybe, but definitely just the weird, awkward phraseology, you know, which does come, I think, from Gaelic holdovers, like the way certain things are put in Irish English are basically just they've transposed the old structure. But anyway, I think she gets a hard time because she basically censored the story, right? She took out a lot of the gore. She took out all of the sex for the most part, and all the gross body stuff. There's a lot of excreta and stuff like that in the old stories. A lot more acknowledgement of the fact that people fought naked, you know, at the time, and yeah. So she did kind of, and yet it's still really good. I think it's a really good first version. So the Táin, this is when kind of Kinsella goes back to the original manuscript and does a more honest translation. It's definitely gorier. It's definitely, you know, he's the first person to talk about, and I'm going to say this wrong. The Gaelic word is the riastrad or something like that, but you would know it as the warp spasm, because that's the word he used to translate it into English, which the character of Cuchulainn, to give a very short version, basically is he's the son of one of the main gods in the kind of Celtic whatever pantheon, I guess. Lu Lamfada, which means Lu of the long arm, or Lu Ildanach, which means Lu the master of all arts.
Okay.
And he's kind of this. He's the Irish sun god. There is a version that Wales has a version of him also called Lu, but spelled L-L-E-W, I think.
L-L-E-W.
Yeah.
Llew, which is
Yes.
lion.
Right. So Lugh, the Irish. Anyway, I'm going to talk about him a bit later on, but he is the father, and this is a kind of a carrying on of this this other myth cycle into. So this that may be a later interpolation into the Cuchulainn story. I'm not sure, because in fact some of these gods may have been invented after this story was originally created, and then kind of retrofit back into it. But anyway, he's the son of Lugh, and Lugh himself is a weird mixed parentage, because his grandfather was one of the great villains of Irish mythology, Balor of the Evil Eye, who I'll also talk a bit later on in another book. Anyway, as a result, I don't know if it's mixed bloodlines or whatever, but Cuchulainn's the only character, I think, in Irish mythology who has this power of being able to swell up to a monstrous size, to literally turn around inside of his own skin. His calves flip around so they're on the front of his legs, a hole opens on the top of his head, and a huge gout of blood sprays out, and he becomes an unstoppable murder machine. He kills hundreds at a time and cannot distinguish between friend and foe. He also becomes superheated. You can't.
Yeah, it takes him a while to calm down, doesn't it?
Yes. He has to be plunged. One of the stories, he has to be rolled in the snow for hours. In another story, in order to get him to stop from killing everybody, they send out all of the young ladies, and they bare their breasts to him, and he's kind of at this point quite shy. I guess that makes him wilt, which is
right. Well, you'd think it would have the opposite effect.
Yeah, you would imagine. Yeah, but but he's anyway. So I'm going to come back to this to what actually happened in the story later on, because I read a second version of this that's a more kind of pulpy version. I'll talk about the actual events of the story, but this is good. But if you're going to actually read the Táin, I might recommend starting with Kieran Carson's most recent translation, because he really goes for the weird. Whereas I think he goes back to pieces of it that nobody has tried to translate because they're so strange. The book it's kind of sometimes compared to like being like the Iliad, something like that, right? Because it's a lengthy war story, but it's not told in verse for the most part. But it breaks into verse, and it's often characters suddenly burst into kind of poetry. But there were these other moments of poetry that it's kind of hard to figure out who's saying them or what's going on. They were the parts that people always left alone, and that Kieran Carson translated, and they're my favorite parts. They're like just mental. They're it's hard to even explain, but it becomes like beat poetry, just weird, gory madness. They're really interesting little pieces.
It sounds like a mix of berserkers as drawn by Francis Bacon in a high school musical style.
Sure. Yeah. I think all of those things kind of
put that
collide together.
There we go. Yeah. Sell it to the kids.
That'll sell for sure. And so that, and I think that there was also the descriptions of the warp spasm, which are quite well done and quite detailed in this. But I think Kieran Carson goes even further. I think he goes back and translates even more of the utter bizarreness. That I think would have been off-putting, I think, to readers maybe in the 1900s, and then by 1969 people were ready for something a bit more authentic, and then I think by the late 2000s, people were ready for the raw, unvarnished story.
Right. It is surprising how few film adaptations there are as well. I mean, there's a lot of like adjacent stuff, right? You got like Conan's and the Italian sort of all that stuff, but it's hard to believe no one's done for all time attempted to do, or like a TV series like the Táin, and it would be a long running.
Yeah, it has not been touched, and apparently Pat Mills has been shopping around a script for a couple of decades now called War Dog, which is his version of the Cuchulainn of the Táin, but nobody has bitten apparently.
a screen adaptation, a script for a screen adaptation.
Yeah.
Ah.
And because I was just reading about it on his website because I looked him up for out of interest, because I'm going to be talking about him shortly.
Shit, you looked things up before coming. I didn't think of doing
it. Yes, one or two. But yeah, no, it is weird, and I think that actually the novel that I read, which is also based on this, I think would make a very good movie. I think it's definitely, it does certain things that make sense narratively. I think if you're going to do it as a movie, but for whatever reason, not yet.
It would be good as well to see one of these films like done properly, seriously, that doesn't have a scene in which a dwarf accidentally falls into a bucket of water and then our manly hero goes
yes,
and the whole village while the thing shakes its head. None of that shit, none of that.
Yeah, agreed. I don't think that actually happens. I don't believe there's a scene like that in The Tane, so that would be perfect.
Because those things always, even as a child, like when something like that would happen in He-Man.
Yep.
Like,
you'd be annoyed.
Yeah.
300, the movie 300 borrows actually quite liberally from, I think, that Frank Miller when he did the comic. There's pieces of it that are nothing to do with anything that happened in Greece that are much more taken right from the pages of The Tane. So that may also create problems then if Pat Mills' script has those same scenes, right, of building walls of corpses and the kind of the scene of all the arrows hitting the shield and then swiping them with the sword. I'm fairly certain that's a part of The Tane.
Yes, I hadn't thought about that before, but now that you mention it, that does seem glaringly obvious, actually. It's pick and mix his myths, right?
Yes, very much. Yeah. Anyway, that's. I'll get back to The Tane after. Okay. What do you have up for us next?
Well. I won't speak as eruditely and as educatedly as you will, but it is very much connected. Penguin Classics, The Mabinogion.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Translated by Jeffrey Gantz.
Okay.
I haven't.
Is that a Welsh name?
No.
Gantz sounds German or something.
I don't know where he's from. Hang on, there's probably a bio. He received a doctoral degree in Celtic languages and literature from Harvard. Oh, he's a septic.
Okay.
I haven't read. This is the only time I've ever attempted to read Mabinogion. It's very, very, very readable.
Okay.
What's kind of interesting about it as well, as you notice, I dog ear my books when there's like interesting books.
Oh yeah.
What I like about it is each story has a very brief little contextual couple of paragraphs that kind of places it in the larger context of because a lot of the stuff in the Mabinogion mirrors, copies, parallels. I don't know exactly what the right phrase would be. Stuff that is in Irish mythology as well.
Yes.
And other European, and sometimes even like ancient Greek stuff. And I would imagine
right.
You find a lot of that in Irish mythology. Yeah, a lot of crossover. Sure. So kind of the fascination with it is just trying to piece together, oh, that's, how come that's there and this is here, and is that coincidental or is it not coincidental, or who's copying who, or because like you said, for instance, in the case of the Tane, it wasn't written down for a very, very long time. Same with these stories as well, right? And you do wonder how long were they transmitted back and forth before anyone wrote down any versions of them, right? So so just because something was set in print at a certain point doesn't mean that was the, it could have been back.
Oh yeah, and not just that, but the people who did finally write them down were in the Irish case anyway, they were Christian monks. And so they had a vested interest in certain cases in eliding certain parts or changing parts or making, you know, so yeah, we'll never really know what the stories were. These are slightly Christianized already before, although it's funny how gross, when we get back to the Táin, how gross some of it is that actually that it did survive and was written down by the monks, or maybe because they were like, oh well, it shows how heathen and savage these people were before we got here.
Exactly, yeah. It sounds to me that there's I don't know, without having read the Táin, I'm not quite sure how to, I mean, the Mabinogion sounds a lot lighter in tone than that, for sure. I mean,
and it's more short. It's more a series of stories, right? Whereas the Táin is one epic story. I mean, again, there's some sub stories.
It's difficult to tell if they were meant like that or if it's just a fragmentary nature, because there's certain recurring, and there's a lot of talk about the son of this person, and as if it's supposed to mean anything to you, right?
Okay.
And, maybe it did once upon a time. If you'd have, previously on Mabinogion, maybe it made sense.
Right.
But it's very fragmentary, and as a result, some stories kind of don't really make any sense, or just run out in the middle, or are just what was that about? Like, so it's kind of difficult to judge it. But some parts are fantastic as well. Again, I don't know if it's also it's such an easy translation. I'm not sure. It feels almost as if maybe it's a little too well translated in terms of just making it what I mean is it's a very good entry point. I think it's a very good first Mabinogion to read.
Okay.
But my guess would be, if you really wanted to get to grips with what it really is, or what it really was, or kind of try to link it, or you were really interested to find out how much of it is based on any historical record, how much of it is pure myth, or any of that stuff, you'd have to dig a lot deeper, I think. But as we learned earlier from trying to read Christopher Hill, trying to tackle the big cliff straight away is maybe not, that's a way to lose interest, right? So I would actually recommend, this has certainly served as a introductory entry point for me, and I am going to carry on and track down all the things that I've dog-eared and research all that. So yes, so this would be a recommendation.
I've been definitely interested in, because there are certain characters or certain gods and certain figures of the kind of the Celtic, I guess, pantheon, who there's versions of them in Welsh myth, there's versions of them in Scottish myth, there's versions of them in Brittany, like French, like the Gaulish kind of areas of France. So it does seem to have all been part of a bigger tradition, I guess, which then obviously changed as people moved further away, and then as the stories were retold. But there are commonalities that show through in all of them. So that's definitely, it was on my reading list to get to once I've kind of finished all of the versions of the Irish ones. Next, I was going to go Wales, and then take a look at Scotland as well. The stories of Finn McCool, who I'm not going to talk about today, but he's the kind of the last phase of this. There's kind of three main cycles of Irish myth. Finn McCool's is the last one, and really deals with the coming of Christianity, and kind of this, it kind of there's an element in it of like particularly with the son of Finn McCool, Oisin. There's this lengthy period of time in one of the final stories where he has this kind of back and forth with a Christian monk over kind of the relative merits of the Christian religion versus the pagan ways. It's interesting, and it's not as one-sided as you would assume, given when it was created and who probably created it. It's it's more dialectic than you would actually think. Finn
McCool,
but anyhow,
father of rubber-faced comedian Phil Cool.
Yes, yeah, I'm fairly sure.
Right.
That's the myth of the rubber-faced man. But so okay, so this is interesting. So I had read about this. I was looking up versions of the Tane on Wikipedia at one point, and then I discovered that there was this ridiculous looking
Wow.
like
That is a
1980s yes. And one interesting thing is, if this is supposed to be Cuchulainn, then he looks like he's about 45, so he's already lived about 20 years after I think the character is supposed to die. Okay. Cuchulainn does not live a long life. His story does not have a happy ending. And when the events of the Tane take place, he's supposed to be like 16 or 17 years old. He's still a teenager. So whoever that wizened, ancient kind of almost sort of Native American looking figure is supposed to be, I'm not quite sure. It's a great cover.
As played by Miles O'Keefe, I would say.
Yeah, basically, yes. Now.
Yeah.
But but this guy Gregory Frost he's an American, which is interesting. And
there's loads of them. But you should go to America.
Yes. But interesting decision to make, to take the Tane and to do it as a kind of Conan the Barbarian style swords and sorcery novel. But I have to say, he does a tremendously good job. It's very entertaining, and he does not shy away from, again, the gore or the kind of bodily functions side of things. And so he includes a lot of the surrounding material, because the Tane itself is part of a much longer kind of set of stories. It's the most important, and it's the kind of crowning achievement of Irish medieval literature. But there's a bunch of stories that actually kind of lead into the Tane, and other stories that take place after the Tane. Mm-hmm. And so, to give a really short kind of version, or as short as I can make it, basically there is a druid called Cathbad. He shows up in Slain as well, the comic. And Cathbad, and the thing is, I'm going to base it off of this. I don't know. I'm trying to remember now if I've read like which parts are. I'm not 100% sure if he made them up or if they're actually from the stories, because I've been reading various versions of the Tane, but I haven't necessarily read the stuff that comes before. Right. But in his version anyway, Cathbad, and I believe this is true, Cathbad is the father of King Connor. And so Cathbad sleeps with King Connor's mother, and then basically King Connor's mother moves to Ulster, where she gets married to the King of Ulster, whose name is Fergus. And King Fergus agrees to this really bizarre and very kind of ill thought out suggestion that he make Connor the king for a year. So she goes, I'll marry you if you make my son king for a year. I want everyone to know that, he won't necessarily be your heir because he's not your son, but I want everyone to know that he was a king. He'll be respected more. So please make him king for a year. You step aside, and then you can come back in and be king after that.
There's a strikingly similar story in the Mabinogion.
Perfect. Okay. So stop me if you heard this one before. So what they do is she and her son, who at this point is I think only 7 or 8, have this plan to tax half of the people in the name of the old king, in the name of Fergus. But we need your money. Fergus needs your money, and then they give that money to the other half of the people in the kingdom of Ulster, and say, "Oh, this is from King Connor. He's giving you this money." And so by the end of the year, half of the people loathe King Fergus, and the other half of them love King Connor.
Yeah, this is exactly the same story, pretty much.
Okay, there we go. And so basically, it's a done deal, and Connor is made permanently king, and Fergus kind of understandably gets the hump and leaves and goes off to Connacht, the westernmost province of Ireland, and he takes up with Queen Maeve and King Ailill, who feature heavily in the Táin.
Okay.
And so Conor grows up, and his sister gets married to this guy called Suldam. I'm going to be saying the names wrong because they are never said the way they're spelt. And anyway, it's that's the Irish language is ridiculous for spelling. But on their wedding night, Conor's sister, her name is something like Dectera, but I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. She gets kidnapped. She disappears. And so do 50 of her handmaidens, and they're gone for a year. And so the king is looking for her. Her husband is looking for her. No sign of her. Finally, this bunch of big red birds fly in. They're pecking up all the ground. Then they take off, and they get kind of chased off by the warriors, who follow them to this house in the middle of nowhere. They go into the house, and there's 50 young women in there, and they're like, oh, they're kind of putting it together. Something's up here. And then it turns out that Lugh of the Long Arm, who is this Celtic sun god, he's there too.
I think, wasn't he?
Yes, yeah. So he's stolen away King Conor's sister, and she's had a child by him, and that child is named Setanta, and Setanta will become Cuchulainn.
Santa Claus.
Setanta.
Oh, no, okay.
and it's probably pronounced more like Sedanda, but anyway, but it's spelled Setanta. Anyway, so, and there's a prophecy. Basically, he says, my child he's half god, he's a demigod. He's gonna grow up to be the greatest warrior in Ireland. So that's all to the good. They take him back. Sultan is okay with this because if you're going to be cuckolded, it might as well be by God. So he just rolls with it and adopts Setanta as his son. And all the other warriors kind of want to foster him out. And this was a part of the Celtic thing, was basically fostering yourself out to various other families for it was a communal affair, raising kids. So he quickly proves that he is incredibly powerful, and he's the best. Hurling, which is an Irish game played with a stick and a ball, kind of a field hockey. It's a leather ball.
Right.
I don't know if there's a Welsh equivalent.
Yes, somehow it sounds very. I mean, yeah, I'm sure there's a variation of.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like something we do. Again, not much to do around our way either.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So he beats all the kids who were much older than him at hurling, and I suppose the next important part is how he gets his name. So he's invited off to the king invites him to come to a feast they're having at this local blacksmith's. There's another feature of Celtic culture where the king has to be feasted. So it's your job, like everyone has the job of throwing the king a feast once a month or whatever it is, right? So it's the job of Cullen this month to host the feast for the king. So the king says, okay, Setanta, when you're finished playing with the boys, hurling, you come along and join the feast. So they all go off. They get to this castle where this guy Cullen, who's a blacksmith, is having the feast, and they forget that they've asked Setanta to come. They blank on it, and so they release this gigantic, monstrous Irish wolfhound, which kind of prowls around the castle and kills anyone who comes near it. And so Setanta is on his way up with he's got his hurling stick and his leather ball with him, and suddenly they remember, shit, like we totally forgot, we let the dog out, and he's going to murder. And at this point, Setanta's 7, I think. He's going to murder my 7-year-old nephew. So they run out and they see, and then again, this is great. In the kiddie versions of it, I read is because this is something you read. It's literally in your like Dick and Jane first reader book when you're a child in Ireland. The story of how Colin got his name.
Right.
In that version, it's just still, he still kills the dog, but basically he throws the ball in the air. smashes it and it hits the dog in the mouth, and the dog is killed.
Yeah, again, this is something very familiar as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. But in the actual Tane, the ball shoots through his mouth, right through his body, and tears his entrails out of his arsehole in a huge stream. The dog is wrecked.
Wow, this is
and so
Brian Yuzna's Tane.
Exactly. and so Colin is understandably upset. He doesn't seem to want to apologize for the fact that they sicked a gigantic dog on a 7-year-old, but he's like, you killed my dog. Like,
yeah, in a particularly horrendous fashion as well.
Yes, yeah, and basically the dog protects my lands, and what am I going to do now? You've screwed me, kid. And so Setanta at this point says, I'll, in best Iggy Pop fashion, I'll be your dog. And he basically makes a contract to take over the role of being Colin's dog. And the old Gaelic word for hound or dog was coo. So, and Colin is this guy's name. So he becomes Cú Chulainn or Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Colin. And he changes his name legally, and that's his name from then on. He doesn't go by Setanta after this.
As well as the Mabinogion, that also reminds me, somewhat strangely, of old TV commercials for Kiora.
Okay.
You remember those? I'll be your dog.
I remember.
I'll be
yes.
your dog.
Yes.
Yeah.
Weird. Again, Iggy Pop.
I can't exactly remember, but in my mind, those Kiora adverts, my memory of them might be wrong, seem racist, although I can't
Yes, agreed.
I can't quite put my finger on why exactly, but
it has the feeling of the crows in Dumbo kind of a vibe to me.
Right, or like
does that make sense?
Early like Disney cartoons, like
yes, yeah,
the Steamboat Willie kind of thing.
Yes, yeah, agreed. There's definitely something seems off about them in my when I think back on them. But so anyway, the deal is that once Cú Chulainn has trained up a new dog in the place, then he'll be released from servitude of this. So anyway, Cú Chulainn grows up. He gets to be a kind of a teenager, like 13 maybe, and all the local.
You're not reciting the entire Tane, you?
Yeah, I'm gonna. It's gonna take 6 hours.
You could have warned me.
Okay, we'll shorten it. He falls in love. He goes away to Scotland. He trains and becomes incredibly, even more powerful than he already is. He gets this weapon called I don't know how to say this, but the Gaebolg, maybe. Gaebolg. It's made out of the spine of a sea beast, and it's got these horrible spines in it. Okay. And it shows up in Slain, and it has to be cut out of. It's almost like a series of fish hooks, like a harpoon. And the only way to have it removed is to cut it out with a sword. And it has to be thrown with the foot, which is bizarre. And best cast in water. There's a very Lone Wolf and Cub kind of a feature, actually, where he does a lot of his fighting in streams later in the Tane. It seems to be his best element. And so often he kind of brings people into the ford, and then he kills them there.
But anyway, when you imagine a lot of this stuff, because of, like you said, over the years we've been fed things through this Hollywood mill or whatever. You're imagining everyone's very manly and deep voices and have these kind of. You don't think of them as sounding Irish, right? You can't. Right. It doesn't sound like. Would you be killing my dog now? Like, there's no. I'm assuming people would be speaking with a somewhat Irish lilt. I don't know how far. Right. I'm assuming the accent goes back a long way.
I would think so. Yeah. I mean, they wouldn't have been speaking in English though, so that might make things different.
Right. Right. But it's an interesting one because it's like I'm imagining. You could set some medieval. There must be something must have happened in Birmingham at one point, right? Something must have happened there of
Yes.
historical interest, and you could do it, but everyone would be talking like that. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see some kind of medieval epic, but it was all in Brummie accents. That'd be great.
Awesome. So anyway, I'll just to cut it short. He comes back. He's fully trained up, and then this thing happens where all of the warriors in Ulster are knocked out by this thing called the pangs of Ulster, which is this curse that's been placed on them where they feel birth pangs for like months and months on end. And the curse states that if Ulster is ever in danger, if Ulster is ever in danger of an invasion, all the men will be taken out by this hideous set of birth cramps. And so this happens. And the neighboring queen and king, Queen Maeve and King Allele, decide to invade Ulster because they want to steal a bull. So this is the best part. The entire thing is about a cow, which is very, very Irish. In fact, a great deal of Irish mythology is about cow theft. It's basically, if you can imagine, it's not because there's no country of Ireland. It's just a series of battling cattle ranchers.
That's like, my fucking cow.
Yes, exactly. And basically every rancher considers himself a king of the local area, and they're constantly at war with each other over who's stolen whose cow. But there's a particularly important cow which Queen Maeve wants, so she decides to invade Ulster to get it. And so, as it turns out, Cuchulain's the only person literally who can fight. So he has to hold off the combined forces of the other 3 provinces of Ireland at this ford, basically. So it's
unaffected by the pangs of Ulster.
Yes, assuming maybe because he's a demigod, kind of, or whatever it is, or he's also, it doesn't affect kids, and he's still technically not quite a man. He's still a teenager, so that may be an element as well. So the story, basically, the entire story is just him killing hundreds upon hundreds of people at this ford over, and yet it doesn't get repetitive. It maintains its interest because there's always some new twist. But it's very Lone Wolf and Cub in that way of just mountains of bodies and just a ridiculous. And then these occasional warp spasms where he truly goes berserk and just annihilates,
I remember you starting this book a little while ago, so I was it is worth reading.
I think it's a good way. It's a good entry point for the story if you didn't want to just read. Okay. But as I said, I do think Kieran Carson's translation is also very readable.
Is that an affordable paperback that you would find cheap?
I would imagine, because it's much more recent, and I would imagine you could also get a Kindle version of it for a fairly a reasonable price.
It looks like 80s.
Oh, sorry. This one, yeah, I don't think I paid a lot for this. I ordered it online.
Is it from the 1980s? Is that when it was written?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But this you can get. I know you can get in Kindle.
Oh, okay.
And I think you can order directly from this guy's website. Gregory Frost has a website, and he did a sequel, which I intend to read, which deals with the kind of the second chunk, not the Táin, but the rest of Cuchulain's story.
Any other interesting things on the? I mean, when you read a fun book by a good author, I'm assuming you're like me. You immediately rush off and see what else they've done, right? Like on Goodreads or whatever. So, are there other interesting looking things on his bibliography?
Yeah, he's done. As I said, he did a sequel to this, and then I'm trying to remember now. I can give me a second. I can just take a look. I think I have his page open here. He's from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And then he's done some kind of possibly some kids stuff. He seems to be a kind of a fantasy guy, but I don't know. I think the only other thing I really want to read is Remskella, which I'm probably saying that wrong, but that's the sequel to this book.
So you obviously came to it via looking around for different versions of things. So he's not like a big name in the fantasy field. that you were familiar with before you read Tane?
No.
Right.
But Orson Scott Card, who is quite a famous, he's a Mormon guy who wrote a bunch of science fiction books. Yeah, Ender's Game. Yeah, he strongly, like, he says, he basically was the one who said this is a great modern, like, you know, a great retelling of the Tane. So
right. Okay. Just to change
back to you.
Yeah, change tack again, another digital one. So I'll hold up nothing.
Yep.
I've been working my way through Michael Palin's diaries.
Okay, right.
Yeah, so I'm in the middle of the second volume now, but I finished the first volume, which is the Python years, basically 69 through the 70s. I don't, because I have a Kindle, I usually judge, like, in general, your average book of average print size of, what is this? Is it paperback? What is it?
I'm not sure what the dimensions of a paperback are.
Generally, like this, for example, with regular print size, I usually read a page a minute, let's say. So I would read a 300-page book in, say, 5 hours if I needed to read it
down.
in one go. Yeah. So, and I'm a bit confused with because I'm reading it in Kindle form, and they must, because it took me hours to read the first volume, hours and hours and hours, and I looked it up online. But the page count for the physical is only 600 pages or something, but it felt a lot. It took a lot longer than that. So I'm guessing it's in very small print or something. Or
print, yeah.
I just realized I have no idea why I mentioned that, but it took a long time to read. Volume 1. But it was a pleasure all the way, I have to admit. Again, very difficult to say. I mean, obviously, Michael Palin's famous for kind of, you know, famously being almost annoyingly nice, right? Like,
yes,
he's the nice one, isn't he? He's the one everyone likes. So,
and I think kind of the good-looking one too. I feel like that he was the most popular with the ladies.
My wife certainly thinks that young Michael Palin was very cute.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, and yeah, but just as well, he just seems like, I don't know. Yeah, he's just he's that guy who gets on with like, you'd have to be particularly, you can't imagine like someone disliking Michael Palin.
Right.
I hate that fucking Michael Palin. Like, I don't think I've ever met anyone who dislikes Michael Palin for whatever reason. So, and that comes across kind of effortlessly in his diaries as well. It's, you know, you feel as if you're conversing with Michael Palin, and so that means even if he's doesn't have anything particularly interesting to say, it's very pleasant to just hang out in his company. It's quite funny actually. In the second volume, especially the one I'm reading now, through the 70s, through the 80s, which is kind of halfway to Hollywood, it's called, which is Terry.
Does that cover ripping yarns?
There's a lot of ripping yarns in the first volume, actually. And I've been rewatching Ripping Yarns as well recently, and boy, they're good. Ripping Yarns is fantastic. I love Ripping Yarns. But it's quite interesting. It seems at some point he must have lived very near to Terry Gilliam, because Terry Gilliam keeps turning up at his house. Like,
right.
Terry G came round. It's just like, I'm imagining him as well doing that face that he does, you know, when he's doing Spanish. The comfy chair. Just imagine like Terry Gilliam oh no, it's Terry Gilliam again
at the window.
Yeah, just staring in. Even at one point, Michael Palin's talking about like Terry G came round. It was a little awkward because he was talking to me about I don't know, having trouble with Brazil or something, and Michael Palin's wife is still like in her nightdress, like trying to do her hair or something, and he's like putting on his clothes. Terry Gilliam's just wandered into their bedroom and
haranguing them about Brazil. Awesome.
So it's quite interesting from that, but I kind of get it, because I think if you lived just around the corner from Michael Palin and you knew him quite well, you probably would pop in for and see what he's up to, kind of thing. And reading his diaries is kind of a good way to do that without actually intruding on him, as Terry Glynn.
Now, do they talk much about the kind of the camps that were, I've read, I guess I've having read other bits and pieces over the years, like that there was kind of the tall, mean ones camp, and then the short, nice ones camp, like within the Python.
From what I understand, initially it's John Cleese and Graham Chapman, and then it's Michael Palin and Terry Jones, and then Eric Idle and Terry Gilliam are almost out on their own kind of thing.
Okay.
Interesting. It's interesting as well. Apparently, Michael Palin is always mistaken for Eric Idle as well. Like, oh, you're Eric Idle. Like, that happens a lot. The other thing that comes out from the book that I didn't expect as well is, but makes sense in retrospect. John Cleese sounds like a bit of a player back in the day. Like, the number of times it's like John Cleese arrived with his new blonde girlfriend and just a few pages. I mean, he seems to have a type, right? Like Connie Booth kind of.
Right.
Yeah, no, he's always turning up with some new blonde on his arm, and he certainly seems the most like ready to embrace the celebrity lifestyle and be a bit more kind of self-aggrandizing, or not in a conceited way, but just, yes, I am John Cleese and I'm gonna enjoy it, in a quite admirable way, really.
Right. So I'm trying to remember now, where did Michael Palin come from? Like, because they came to Monty Python from other.
Yeah, he's like Sheffield way, isn't he? I think.
I meant more like, which show did he come through? Because they were all on other TV.
I think
other British comedy kind of shows.
Wasn't it him and Terry Jones that did what the hell was that show called? What is it? And now the 1948 show or something like it was like where they did like as if it was like a roving reporter, but like in ancient times, and they'd go to different history and
because the Yorkshire, the Yorkshireman sketch came from. I don't know if it was that show or the other one. The Frost Report was where
I think they all wrote for the Frost Report. I think that's the thing that probably brought them together, was David Frost, working for David Frost. Which is an interesting. David Frost is another one of those like figures like from my youth, which is the older you get, you put him into context. Like for me, David Frost was just another of the old guard, and he was that guy. Hello, you did the impression of him speaking like this. It was on Phil Cool's repertoire of things, or Rory Bremner. It was like someone you didn't really take seriously. It was like, oh, granddad's on telly again, kind of thing. And then you realize how much, and of course the whole Frost Nixon thing as well. Right? Like I didn't know about that when I was a kid. I didn't know that David Frost.
Oh yes,
Richard, what?
Yeah.
Like this is the same. For a while, I couldn't. Is this the same David Frost we're talking about? But it is, and it's kind of interesting to think that. It took me until my 30s or something until I kind of had a handle on actually who David Frost was. He wasn't just someone like Les Dawson or.
Slightly more important. David Jason was also part of one of the two camps that ended up coming in, but sort of got.
Yes.
He felt like shut out. He wrote his own autobiography that he was kind of like not invited because he wasn't from that sort of more Oxbridge-y.
Have you read that?
He felt like they didn't like him. No, my mom did. My mom tends to read a lot of biographies, and so I think she had told me that he felt
Did she
quite hurt that he wasn't. They didn't consider. Yes. Yeah.
Oh. Interestingly as well, does your mom have a little bit of a thing for David Jason? Because I think my mother liked David Jason as well. I seem to remember my mother.
Sure, she. Yeah.
Watching things because
I'm sure she's always appreciated him.
Yeah.
Was in them. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Only Fools and Horses was hugely and endlessly successful. Probably long past when it was worthy of being successful.
The funny thing about that, though, now that I mention it, I remember my mother watching things with David Jason in, but I don't remember her ever watching Only Fools and Horses, oddly enough, which is the one you'd think maybe,
right.
Maybe he doesn't look good in a donkey jacket or something. I don't know.
Right. But and then what's his face? Marty Feldman was also
he's around
on one of those shows, those pre kind of
he's just died in the middle of Volume 2 on the set of Yellowbeard, right? I didn't realize as well quite how young he died, like early 40s.
Right.
Because it's difficult to tell his age.
My dad was always a huge fan of.
Yes. Difficult.
Crazy eyes.
Difficult to tell, because of those crazy eyes. You can't quite tell if he's young or old or what is he, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But died very young. I apologize to any goggly-eyed viewers.
Right. Any Tom Bakers out there?
So there we go. That's Volume 1 of the Michael Palin Diaries, and I'm sure at a future time I shall discuss Volume 2 a little bit. I'm particularly looking forward to Volume 3 because that's his traveling around the world.
Right, when he did his around the world.
Yeah, I'm guessing
TV series
would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, he was very much at the forefront of that. I mean, everybody seems to have done that since him. You know, like Billy Connolly had series, and Ewan McGregor had series, and it's endless. There's one right now with that the guy and his dad. Can't remember his name. Anyway,
yeah,
Jennifer was watching it the other day. Anyway, but he was very much the first time I remember anybody doing that kind of semi-humorous travelogue kind of thing.
Right. And again, perfect casting, right? Because he's the guy that everyone gets on with, and
yes, yeah. He's not going to cause an international incident anywhere.
Right.
Okay. So
Nick,
I think what I'm going to talk about is this. So as I said, there's a through line here, as we've noticed, because I've been reading a lot of Celtic mythology. This is the Grail War.
Okay.
It's one of the I would say later Slain stories, but that's only for me. That doesn't mean anything to anybody else, because I think it's probably one of the earlier or middle ones, really.
Is it Simon Bichet or?
So the artists are Nick Percival and Steve Tappan, but the cover is by a guy called Dermot Power, who sort of took over from Simon Bisley and Glenn Fabry, who were kind of the two main Slain artists.
Can't I see a little Italian name there on the end?
That's Massimo Belardinelli.
Yes, I was going to say, but you didn't mention. Yeah.
Sorry, that's because there's a reprint at the end of the book of a much earlier story that had been published in the 1983 annual, but it hadn't been. The earlier volumes of the Slain stuff were all in black and white. So they didn't put any. So it should have gone much earlier in this set of graphic novels, but they held it back until they were doing them in color, I guess, and added it as a little kind of bonus.
Of which publishing history, the Grail War is when? Is it?
Well, I mean, take a look at the year, I guess.
So, because I don't know if I know the Grail War, so I'm wondering if it's a few years after
90. Yeah, 97, 98.
There we go. Yeah.
So this is not great.
Oh no.
To be perfectly honest, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm a big fan of Slain.
Yeah.
And I, as I said, I had read everything up until 1989, at which point I moved to Canada, and my kind of ability to get 2000 AD comics stopped pretty much.
Mm.
When we moved to Canada, we had to fill up these tea chests, these kind of big wooden boxes with all of our stuff, and my parents kind of kindly allowed me to bring a fair amount of my comics with me. So I reread and reread
many comics at that point. Did you have a large comic collection?
Yes, because I think I had I've been buying 2000 AD weekly for, I would imagine at that point, 5 or 6 years, probably from the age of 9 through 14. And then I had bought back issues. Anytime there was a jumble sale at the school or whatever, I would. So and then there was also the Best of 2000 AD monthly. There were various reprints. We talked about this recently, you and I, just like, there was the Quality Comics reprints, there was the Eagle Comics reprints. So yeah, I had amassed a decent collection of 2000 AD related stuff.
I got ripped off at a jumbo sale. I paid £4 for an Eagle annual that was missing pages. I never found out how Dan Dare defeated the Mekon in that particular episode.
Scenario.
Apparently, Mekon, when I was a kid, he was Meccan to me. I don't know how you pronounce it.
Okay.
I always called him the Meccan.
Probably the Mekon, but I don't know why. I'm not sure why I would have. I think my cousin Andrew collected Eagle, as well as 2000 AD, but I was always more of a 2000 AD man.
Right. Yes.
But basically, so really, perhaps the high watermark is this, right?
Yes. You have the same one I have.
Yes, this is the most recent reprint. Right. In terms of both the art and maybe in bringing that initial story arc to an end. Like, I mean, I think this really is kind of the end of that kind of era of Sling, and it does tie up a lot of the plot elements and kind of in a nice way.
And just in general, top 10 comics material, right? I mean, it's up there.
Yeah.
It's one of the finest comics I've ever read, back then and now.
The art is incredible, and it's definitely Pat Mills at the height of his storytelling when it comes to Slain, I think.
Yeah.
But so, and this is an issue that I have also with. I have it up here. Give me 1 second. No, they're hidden somewhere else. Okay, anyway, basically, there comes a point in Devilman as well, the Nagai Go series of comics, where, and this has to do with maybe it being more of an interpolation. Years after Go Nagai wrote the original Devilman series and wrote it to an ending, he decided he wanted to add more. And the only way he could do that was to write a series of time-traveling adventures where he takes Devilman and Ryo, who turns out to be Satan, on this series of adventures through time, and it's crap. It's like it's done way later on. The art's ropier looking than it was in the original run, I think, and the stories are just painful history lessons. There's not a lot of redeeming value. There's nothing going on in the stories themselves that's actually that interesting. Right. And this is unfortunately the road that Pat Mills starts to take, I feel, with Slain.
Right.
Basically having reached the point at which there's a natural ending to the story, but wanting to continue with the character, he takes Slain on a series of time traveling adventures with increasingly, diminishing returns, I think. And at this point, for me, this is the point at which it's starting to bottom out. He had ones. The strongest of them is the one that kind of where Slain goes and hangs out with Boudica, if that's how you say her name, the Celtic, queen from England who fought the Romans. That's actually very well done.
But when you say,
and then he has one.
When you say time traveling adventures, I mean, are they at least is it all in the ancient? It's not like the time, like you don't get slain like arriving in Dallas on November 2nd, 96. It's not like that kind of thing, is it?
No,
Right.
no. Although at this point I'm worried.
Awful.
No,
it's that's like, because then the comedy is like when, you know, Tarzan has to go to New York and, you know, people keep telling him to put clothes on or whatever, that kind of thing. Yeah.
But in any case, the one that takes place after that one takes place in Sherwood, and basically Slane takes up the mantle of being Robin Goodfellow. It's basically a Robin Hood story.
And that's dangerously near the territory I was just lampooning.
Yes, well, that's what I'm saying. So, you know, so there are issues, right? I mean, even though they're technically still set in kind of a medieval time, it's not great. And then there's a King Arthur kind of one as well, which features King Arthur and Slane. And then the next one is so this one begins, basically. So the King Arthur one kind of finishes, and then we get into the beginning of this. And this one is it's Slane and William Wallace of Braveheart fame.
Right, yeah, no, I'm losing the will now. That's wow. That's such a strange. I didn't realize they started doing that. I didn't realize Slane went through that period. That's wow.
Yeah. So, you know, there we go. Freedom and death to the English. I
mean, it's a sentiment I can get behind, but I just, you know.
No, but it's certainly about as subtle as Braveheart. Wow. And in fact, less so, because in this one they literally make the English demons, which, you know, as somebody else in a review I read pointed out, like, you know, maybe be careful about literally demonizing your villains. You know, it's a slightly dodgy approach to take. And then it gets worse, I think, when we go to this whole story about Simon de Montfort and his kind of attacks on the Cathars and the kind of this whole and a thread that runs through this is that he keeps re-meeting Neve, his lost love from his you know, initial life as a Celtic barbarian. Neve is kind of, well, I think they finally get married at the end of the Horn God.
Yes.
But now he keeps kind of coming across these reincarnations of her. So she's kind of a version of Maid Marian when, you know, your face tells the story. Yeah.
How far did they go? I mean, it's like Slane on the beaches at Normandy, and like
honestly, we'll find out.
Churchill aside, and is like, I think maybe something about fighting them on the beaches, something like that. Winston, Slane, that's a wonderful idea. To fucking close on that.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get there. No, I don't think I'm hoping that actually this is the end of this this time traveling jaunt. But they try to get a lot of comic mileage in this one out of the fact that Neve has been reincarnated as Simon de Montfort, so her soul is encased in this dude, and there's an awful lot of dodgy kind of gay humor and stuff. It's just it's rough, to be honest. For 1997 and for Pat Mills, it's kind of it's a little bit like, huh.
Do you think that was him to do his like Orlando kind of thing?
Sure, but there are ways and means of doing it where it wouldn't have ended up being a kind of an extended gay joke, you know.
Right.
And that's the way this comes off. And so
I had no idea of this era of Slane's career. I have to admit. I don't know if I want.
My understanding,
I'm somewhat disillusioned.
Well, no, I mean, what his things, I've got more beyond this, and my understanding is the next volume is a set of stories set before before the Horned God. So it's kind of returned to classic era Slane, and I'm cautiously optimistic that it'll be better. And then my understanding is I think he does at some point bring Slane back to his own time, more or less.
And helps Mark Bolan fight the mafia.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
So
yes, unfortunately, this is a bit of a low water mark for Slane. There are much better Slane stories than this one.
It links. I'm doing real-time links. Yeah, we're doing well.
Okay.
And the link is people who should have kind of stopped and like taking a concept like, oh, there might be more to this, but sometimes it's better to leave it, right? Like not necessarily
leave them wanting more.
Yeah. And that is Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon 2.
Okay.
With overweight. Oh, that's interesting. My device, not Alexa, the other one, has just started playing Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass. I don't know if you can hear that. Excuse me while I go and turn it off.
Awesome. We'll probably be cutting this part out, gentle viewers. Hopefully, otherwise this is going to be very awkward while you sit here and watch me drink tea while Clive goes.
Yeah, I was. Am I going insane? Am I
hearing? That playing in my brain.
Am I hearing Herb Albert? Because the trouble with that music as well is, as soon as you hear it, you think you're in a sitcom, right? And you expect the boss's wife to come round for dinner or something, and I've just burnt the casserole. Or anyway, yes, Hollywood Babylon 2 with a overweight Liz Hurley. Not Liz Hurley.
Liz Taylor?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I don't think Liz. I don't know what happened to Liz Hurley, but I don't. Yeah. There's a lot of digs at Elizabeth Taylor in this book, actually. One of which is having this picture on the cover. Yeah. And it's a kind of indicative of the problem with it in a way. Like, I kind of get why he would have done that, because I suppose the idea is that Elizabeth Taylor at some point was supposed to be like the new Cleopatra, right? She was considered like the most
Hollywood royalty.
Yeah, the most beautiful woman in the world. And then she kind of turns into that. So I suppose the extended analogy is, Hollywood making you monstrous. Or I kind of get where he was going, but in this case, it just seems kind of mean.
It seems a little pointlessly mean-spirited. Yeah. Yes, I don't. Yeah.
And have you read the original Hollywood Babylon?
I've read the original, yes, ages ago, but yes, I have.
Yeah. Which I think is a great book. It's a great read. He gets the tone right. It's like very gossipy.
Yes.
And kind of catty, but not in a mean way, really. Or when it is mean, there's something kind of playful about it. Like it's got that kind of atmosphere to it where you don't take it too. It's like, I don't know what the word is. There's like an element of camp to it as well, isn't there?
Yes, it's more John Watersy,
Yeah, and it's informative, and it's a lot of, and it's stylistically it's really well done, and with the use of the photos that they use and everything as well, and the little captions that he has, and I've read that several times, and it's a very entertaining kind of take on, and a few people have tried it since in different ways, like that Clive Barker novel called Heart Canyon, I think.
Right, I've never read that, but
right, yeah, set that kind of a peek at the what's the word I'm looking
the private lives of the rich and famous.
Yeah, but that particularly decadent early days of Hollywood kind of things that were so much worse than you expect them to be because it's in black and white, and
right. Fatty Arbuckle turns out to be a
that kind of thing.
Sketchy guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I had a lot of fun with the first book, and and I can kind of see, I'm sure there are more stories, and there are more stories, and I get the idea of kind of, I suppose, if you were to put yourself in Kenneth Anger's shoes, it's forgivable because you can see why he would think, well, there's a whole lot of these other stories lying around. But it does feel like that, like he's like swept the shavings off the floor kind of thing.
Yeah.
Rather than cherry picked. So I mean, I did finish it because it's informative and it's interesting, and there's scandalous gossip and all that. But it took me a long time to read it. Like, I'd read a little bit and then put it back on the shelf and then take it out, and it wasn't like the first one was so compelling. You could read the whole thing in one very long. Your bath would be very cold, but you could do it. But this took a while. So it's it's a good example of what you were talking about, really, of the concept's strong and there's more to it, but yes, like you said, sometimes you have to kind of leave that, like it's better to leave it and not scrape the bottom of the barrel. So not terrible, and it has things of interest, but, and like I said, slightly mean-spirited things, stuff to Liz Taylor.
When did he, so how much longer after the first one did he write that one, or like roughly when is that one written? Is that more,
I think this one came
kind of the 80s or the 90s?
84.
Okay, all right.
So yeah, actually a good while after the first one, I suppose.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. So yeah, and of course he's an interesting figure in general, Kenneth Anger. I mean, sometimes strokes of genius, and then other times what I mean, he's just one of those fascinating figures. So I think almost anything he's connected to is worth a look, a cursory look. But yeah, if you read and enjoyed Hollywood Babylon, I wouldn't expect to enjoy Hollywood Babylon 2 as much if I were you. So again, a cautionary tale there.
Okay.
Right. Back over to you. This is your last one now, is it?
This will be my last one, yeah.
Right.
And this is going to seem strange for a few different reasons, but the book I'm going to talk about is called A Wizard Abroad. It's by an author called Diane Duane.
Right.
And it's book 4 of a series.
What's that?
It's jumping violently out of the sea onto a beach, maybe.
That's a strange painting. The perspective on it is a bit off, isn't it? Like,
which is funny. I should have brought it up. That was one of the things that I think bothered me about this, was that there was also a law of diminishing returns in terms of the quality of the the artist who did. Actually, to be honest, both of these artists were not as strong as the ones who'd come before, and it's really inconsistent, like quite outrageously so. Like, some pages are actually, but even by the same artist, like you go back 2 pages and you'd be like, yeah, here we go. So this, it's quite gory, but it's also quite well drafted, and the anatomy is relatively good. And then you have, I don't know if you can see that, but that's strange. This is the same artist, a few pages apart, and it's like that all the way through. It's constantly pushing and pulling me out.
I'm guessing that's an artist half asleep over his writing desk, extremely late at night to meet a deadline.
Yes. Yeah. Potentially a deadline related stuff. This, it's part 4 of a series that's quite a bit longer, that I have not read parts 1, 2, and 3, and have no intention probably of reading any of the rest of them. So there's a very specific reason why I read this one.
You're collecting all badly drawn cats on covers.
Yes. I'm compiling a book. But
a monograph.
Yes, on Wonky Moggies, it's going to be called.
I'd buy that.
But anyway, so I think I discovered this book when I was doing research on the Fomorians. Okay, so this is my final connected piece of this whole Celtic mythology jag that I'm doing today. The Fomorians are a race of kind of primordial, primeval, monstrous, possibly fish people. There's a very kind of Lovecraftian element here that predate in Irish mythology. The Irish gods, the Tuatha De Danann, or the people of the goddess of Danu, when they get to Ireland, there's already people there. I like the fact that Irish mythology begins with there already like being an indigenous people who they're like, we need to get these people out of here.
Do they steal?
And there's yeah, yes, I'm sure they do. So the basically, if the Tuatha De Danann become kind of synonymous with light and life and all of that stuff, then the Fomorians are synonymous with the kind of the cold depths of the sea and death and pestilence. And in fact, they use pandemics as one of their most kind of useful weapons. And I assume, basically, I'm sure it comes out of a fear of crop failure, fear of disease, all of those things. They become personified as these monsters, the Fomorians. And I find them really interesting. They show up in that kind of set of myths that are supposed to be the foundational myths of Ireland. So what's called the Book of Conquests or the Book of Invasions. And it's very long, and I tried reading it, but it's one of those things that it really, I think, is best left to academics, maybe, who have more patience than I do. But there was a great adaptation done back in the 70s by a guy called Jim Fitzpatrick, which I'm going to bring up right now because it connects. So Jim Fitzpatrick did 2 books. This one, the Book of Conquests.
I'm getting a bit of a Asterix vibe.
Right. Jim Fitzpatrick is probably best known, although people don't necessarily know that they know him, for having, the Che Guevara print that you've seen on a million T-shirts and posters.
Yeah.
So that's his. He's an Irish artist, and back in the early 70s, late 60s, he actually met Che. Che apparently got lost. There was some weird situation where he ended up having to land in Ireland. Like the flight was diverted or something, and then he couldn't leave because of fog, and so he ended up spending 2 days in Limerick, in County Limerick, which is awesome. And then had a few pints and ended up meeting the young Jim Fitzpatrick. And then a few years later, Jim made this poster, which he deliberately took his name off of because he wanted it to be anti-copyrighted, so that various lefties could use the image.
Right.
But in more recent years has been frustrated by the amount of that it's no longer being used by lefties, it's just being used by corporations to put onto
right.
Yeah.
And there's it just reminds me of the going back, there's the Monty Python connection. There's that sketch, isn't there, where is it Che Guevara, Karl Marx, and Mao Zedong are on a quiz show.
Yes.
Eric Idle only asks them questions like, the Hammers are the nickname of which English football team?
Yes.
And there's also the awesome bit in the Ruttles, All You Need Is Cash, where the Ruttles play at Shea Stadium, named after Shea Stadium. just a good little throwaway gag I quite like.
And so the other thing that Jim Fitzpatrick is known for is he was an album cover artist in the 60s and 70s in Ireland, or mostly the 70s. So he did a bunch of Thin Lizzy's album covers, and then other kind of Irish rock bands. So anyway, he decided to adapt. I guess he had a long interest in the old myths of the Celts, and so he adapted. He wrote the text and then did these fully illustrated and then heavily kind of and all of this was drawn, right? This is kind of pre-computers, so all of this border work was kind of his, and these were around the same time as I would have read the Tame. So here's back to this version. I would have taken these out of the Wicklow County or Wicklow Town Library as well. And they were out of print for a while, and then I was able to find them again.
Quite beautiful, aren't they?
Yeah, they're. I don't know if they're still in print or not, but they're. But yeah, there we go. The Invasions of the Fomor. So the Fomorians feature heavily in this second volume, and this is that's Lou. That's Cuchulain's dad. That's Lou of the Long Arm, right there. Yes. And also there was for the 12-year-old me, there was a little bit of
now we're getting to the
yes. There was some of that going on. But I mean there was pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
And again it made Ireland seem cool to me in a way that it didn't seem cool before.
We're bringing it back around again. Yes.
Yeah. So when I was doing research about the Fomorians, and then I just on the Wikipedia page, it was like where they've showed up in
Fomorians
popular culture.
Right.
Yes, yeah. And one of the places
find out there was a Radio 4 drama in 1973.
Exactly.
with Spike Milligan as king of the Fomorians. Yeah.
Yes. So this book showed up as being part of this series of kids' books pre-Harry Potter about like child wizards, and basically and it's funny, as I read it, I recognized like certainly she anticipates certain elements of what J.K. Rowling did, and not rampant transphobia though. But I'm not sure you're aware of J.K. Rowling's circling the brain lately. Okay, sorry. Anyway, so this book, I guess, I don't know, I haven't read the first couple. Evidently, it's about a couple of kids from America, one of whom is a girl called Nita, and she's become a wizard, and her friend Kit, who seems to have Rodriguez, he seems to be of some kind of Latin American extraction. They have become wizards, and they've had I guess 3 adventures before this. At the beginning of this book, she's sent to Ireland by her parents because they're concerned about she's getting in too many magical related, dangerous situations, and they're concerned about her relationship is too close with this boy that she does magic with, even though they don't seem to be romantically involved. They send her off to live with her auntie who has a farm. But what surprised me was it's all set in Wicklow, which I didn't expect and I should say also when I found this book in a thrift store or like in a secondhand shop, and I was looking at it and I pulled it out and I realized it was the book I was like, is this the thing that I was reading about on Wikipedia? And so it was. It cost me like
it was a book you had and your name was written in it
already.
And
yes. Oh.
This is a 90s book. You said pre-Harry Potter, so
yes, this one was. I mean, so the first one's written in the 80s. This one was 93.
Okay.
This is book 4.
And is it a well-regarded? Not by you, obviously. You'll be getting to that, I guess. But is it a well-regarded series? Is it like something that is?
It seems to be. And the woman who wrote this, Diane Duane, I was interested. She had written. She's kind of one of those science fiction writers who's kind of like almost like not quite work for hire, but she's worked in a variety of, like she's done Star Trek books, and there's that kind of like she's paid her dues through that kind of thing.
Right. And this is a YA novel, right? I'm assuming.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So in the story she ends up in Wicklow. So that was like hearing references to the Sugarloaf Mountain, which I climbed as a kid with the Boy Scouts, and the Wicklow People newspaper features. Like it's the setting is very well observed, and it made me think like, well, how in God's name, why would she choose? Like it's very specific,
right?
To where I grew up, and it surprised me because I had some intentions of kind of, I feel she has kind of covered some areas that I had intended to do in something I was planning to write myself. So it's useful that I saw this, was like, okay, well, I have to maybe adjust some of my own plans
You
for
have
what
a
I was going to
dog
write.
on the cover of yours, jumping
Yes.
away from a board.
Yes. So, but it turns out, because I did a bit of reading about her just before I finished the book, and I did a bit of reading about her just a few minutes ago, and realized she lives in Wicklow now. So apparently she's from New York, but she married a Northern Irish guy, and they moved together to Wicklow County, I guess, sometime before this was written. God knows why
it's a piss.
Anyone like why anybody would why in Gotham anybody would do that is well beyond me. But anyway, in the book, she separated from her kind of wizarding friend. She has this adventure where basically the walls between the idea is kind of that in Ireland, the walls between magic and non-magic are much more porous maybe than they are in the rest of the world, because Ireland has such a long history of this kind of the mounds, the Sidhe, what they're called. It's spelled Sidhe. As a kid, it always confused me, but like, yes. But the Sidhe are basically where there's this idea in Celtic mythology that at a certain point that this group of these guys, this group of the first set of gods. Yes. So by the point at which Cuchulainn has come along, this whole set of gods has retreated from the land of the living, I guess, and has gone off to Tir na Nog, the land of the forever young. They've moved sideways, which is a really nice way to imagine it. I don't know. They've gone sideways. And so they now dwell in the mounds, in those kind of hillocks, in those old
they sound
structures.
Like the little people of Arthur Macken's hills as well.
Absolutely. I think they're definitely inspired by those older myths of.
Right.
So in this book, basically the walls are breaking down and the Fomorians are starting to reappear. They're coming through, and there has to be this pitched battle between this group of Irish wizards. So she kind of meets various Irish wizards. She meets a young guy called Ronan, who seems like a bit of a dick, but and then it included quite a lot of like well observed pieces of Irish mythology, like stuff about Lugh of the Long Arm, that spear that you might remember from the Horned God, the one that screams and has to be held in like a that is something from Celtic mythology, and it shows up in the story as well, yeah, I mean it was good. The only thing is, if the whole series was all about the Fomorians and stuff.
When you said I certainly won't be reading the others, I took that for a slight on the book, but you actually did.
No,
you did.
It was fine, but I don't see that it would be useful to me to necessarily, and I didn't like it enough that I felt like I had to read the rest of them.
No, I see what you're saying. Perfectly acceptable, fair, but life's too short to check them all.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, for sure. And as I said, I had specific interests in discovering to what degree that she had trod on the ground that I wanted to, that I thought I had staked out for myself. And it was particularly jarring to find out that she'd said it in Wicklow. That was like, what? Right. Why would anybody said anything in Wicklow? What?
Apologies to all our viewers in the Wicklow area.
Well, no, the joke is that's exactly where I had intended to set mine, because that's where I grew up and it's where I know best. Anyway, but it's yeah, I mean it's not bad. I did like the fact that she left us a glossary at the back with some explanations of how to pronounce words like Amadon, which I didn't know actually. That's the Irish word for idiot.
Right.
And
yes, I'm interested in the period of time of the I think it's between these eras you're talking about, the era of the gods who came in and randomly dropped consonants in the middle of all the words so that so the mortal man could not read them anymore, so they were the domain of the gods only.
Well, as a Welshman, you would definitely know about having more consonants than
yes,
you could ever hope to need in a word.
I'm sure there's a way to fit. It's just I've never taken it. It makes sense to me in Welsh, but like whenever I see certain Irish words, it's even more baffling to me than French. Like I can just about figure out how they decided to make that noise using that collection of letters in French. But sometimes in Irish, you're just looking at it and thinking, that's not right. That's clearly a mistake. That's been kept.
Yes, you can always tell. You can always tell, you know, baffled tourists who will come up and ask you questions like, do you know how to get to Drogheda? And then you'll be Drogheda. Yes, I do know how to get to Drogheda. But it doesn't really make any sense why the words are spelled the way they are. But sorry, there was one other thing I wanted to bring up that to bring back. This is the only time I'll ever be able to do this, I think, in one of these. I have recommended listening as well. So let's go back to the Táin.
Okay.
To go with this, you would want to listen to the 1972 album The Táin by the band Horselips. Which is
right in that.
They are an Irish. They're a Celtic rock band from the 70s. They pretty much invented Celtic rock. In fact, I don't think there really was a band before them.
I don't know.
They have Horselips. Apparently, they're it comes from a Spoonerism that was like the four poxmen of the Horselips. But it's spelled Horslips. Horselips. I'm sure there was another. Yes, I mean, given some of the songs and the kind of the double entendre, I'm sure they were well aware of what their name also sounds like.
Right.
But anyway, great band. There's 2 albums, and I'll get to the other one in a moment because it connects to something else. Anyway, and then when you go to this, the Táin, the read-on version, I would recommend listening to a song from Horselips, but covered by a band called Feck. They are an American heavy metal band who covered the song Darrig Doom, which is one of the best songs on the original Táin album. Right. And it's a nice kind of slightly updated metal-y version of that song. But I'll get to Feck again because, well,
that cover does look like you should be listening to metal while.
Yeah. Oh yes, for sure. And then I suppose for this one, you would want to listen to another album by Horselips called The Book of Conquest or The Book of Invasions.
Okay.
Can't remember which. Anyway, it'll be one of those two because it's a series of songs more or less.
I wasn't aware we were doing this section of the show. I haven't.
Well, we won't be ever again.
Right. I haven't prepared any musical accompaniment, so I would recommend reading the Mabinogion while listening to, I don't know, Pentangle or Feck Convention or something. Who I'm sure must have played a festival with Horselips.
For sure.
Hawkwind were on as well.
And there's also, to go with this as well, there's a great song by an Irish heavy metal band from the north of Ireland called Wayfarer, and they're a much more kind of doomy, kind of sludgy, but with a vaguely Celtic, you know, the occasional tin whistle will show up as well, but more inspired by, I think, Norwegian kind of black metal-y stuff. They have a song called Balor.
Tin whistle through an amp? Oh.
Yes.
Heavily distorted tin whistle.
But yeah, they have a song called Balor of the Evil Eye, Wayfarer. Good song.
Okay.
Worth looking up.
All right.
And then I suppose if you want to listen just for general Slane, listening purposes, I just mentioned there's a band called Feck.
Yeah.
And their original name was the Lord Weird Feck. It's been shortened since to Feck.
Is
their first
Feck spelled XTFEG? S-L-O-U?
No.
Oh.
But you might remember that, if I can find a picture of him in here, that the Lord Weird Feck is the villain in the first whole run of Slain. So there's this American band who call themselves Feck, but better than that, their first 4 albums are entirely just, all of the songs are about Slain.
Wow.
It's totally ridiculous.
Wow.
It's just like all the song titles will just be the chapters of stories from our old 2080 stories, like The Beast and the Broch, or...
It's a hell of a coincidence that my first band, all our first 4 albums are all based on the Beano and the Dundee.
There you go.
Yeah. Desperate Damn Blues was Someone Stole My Cow Pie. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's not actually not a bad idea now. I'm thinking of a project involving that, Mark Bolan, international man of mystery, and time traveling Slain.
Yeah, there we go. Mashed it all up. As I think, next time we come back, it'll be a much more diverse set of picks for me. It's not going to be a 7 books all related to each other with a listening.
Yes, it'll be a streamlined. I've got 1 book left.
Oh, go!
It's my last book of today's show. Thank fuck, you're probably all saying, and this is Death in Midsummer and Other Stories by Yukio Mishima.
Okay.
And this has got a pretty nice cover. I don't know if it comes across.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a screaming, open-mouthed, guy with a rockabilly quiff, maybe, or a hat or something. But I quite like this cover. Maybe a soldier. Is that a beret, maybe, or?
It could be. But it's funny. It reminds me a little bit of the stuff from that old version of the Tane with the ink bloody kind of.
So Yukio Mishima, of course, a very famous name. And have you read any Mishima?
I don't think so. I might have read something when I first moved to Japan, but I honestly don't think so.
Right. The only other one I've read is the novel, The Temple of the Gold Pavilion, based on the true story of that guy who burnt down like an ancient temple in Kyoto, which was also a great read and turned into a really good film with Ichikawa Raizo. Okay. Called Conflagration or End Zone.
Yeah. Okay. I haven't seen it, but yeah,
good film.
That's something I've always meant to do.
So so he's a fascinating figure in general. Yukio, I'm not going to do a Yukio Mishima primer here, but I mean, the whole stuff about like kind of
the abortive coup.
Yeah, and then killing himself, and just in general, I find him really fascinating. Of course, the subject of that Paul Schrader movie as well, right? Mishima, A Life in Chapters, where he's played by Ken Ogata. And he's such a, on the one hand, you see interviews with him, for example, you can find old interviews on YouTube, and he spoke English beautifully as well. And, he had a very kind of well-rounded kind of international kind of education and kind of quite learn. And what I mean is, you can tell from his writings as well that he wasn't. What's the best way to describe it? He seems like a very, on the one hand, he seems like a very tolerant.
Internationally minded.
Yeah,
kind of guy.
And just kind of would embrace difference rather than push it away. And then on the other hand, he has this extremely problematic kind of version of patriotism and nationalism which is, I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It is massively right-wing and kind of militaristic and
it's fully fascist kind,
actually, that is the word I'm looking for, was fascist. But it seems so weird that, because it doesn't seem to have, even though he seemed to have obviously drifted more towards that towards the end of his life, it doesn't seem to be like a split, like he was once this and then he was radicalized or something like that. It seems to have really organically grown in him, like the way he approached life. Like it's almost like he reached this conclusion and he genuinely reached it like, well, I followed the trail of evidence and it's just the way it is, right? It's like, the evidence. And interestingly, it'd be fascinating if he lived longer, if he was still around, because I'm thinking this has slight parallels with some people I've met, some people I know who have, basically Holocaust deniers, right? And if you or pick your conspiracy of choice, right, and they genuinely don't think, for instance, that they might be anti-Semitic, and they genuinely think they've reached that conclusion by following the trail of evidence, and they don't even realize that they're cherry picking. So I think it's entirely possible for people to be prejudiced without even actually being aware that, I mean, genuinely they would be shocked if you said, you're an anti-Semite, right? Like, and then pointed out coincidentally that all these conspiracy theories you believe, have you noticed that you always think the Jews are behind it? Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, wow. I never, So I'm wondering in Mishima's case as well, even though it seems as if he's reached that conclusion because we only know him through his work in a way. So it seems like you wonder, well, if that's not the case, if he did have some kind of deep-seated, I don't know, I don't even know what the word would, I don't would it be, and it's some sort of chauvinism, right? And I'm wondering if ever he bent everything around that without even realizing he was doing it, or not. Because if he was like just that, then you'd, okay, fair enough. But on the other hand, he's an amazing writer. I mean, some of his stuff is fantastic. I mean, I really enjoyed the Temple of the Ground. In this collection, there's a play in there as well, a short play that he wrote, and it's all of consistently high quality. But the standout for me is a story called Patriotism, and it's fascinating for a number. I mean, it's a great story in and of itself, but also because it ties in with. So he also made a short film called Patriotism, based on this short story. I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's like 20 minutes long or something. And basically this story is based on a real event where, are you familiar with the 226 incident?
I'm not sure.
This was a failed...
It sounds vaguely familiar, but it's been so long.
Yeah, there was Gosha Hideo made a film about it called 4 Days of Snow and Blood. And it was basically a failed military coup in 1936, 2nd of February 1936. And I can't remember exactly what he was. Was he like a lieutenant? He was some sort of a military figure, not a higher up, but like a mid-ranking officer of some sort, who basically wasn't involved with the coup himself, but some people kind of under him were. And he was kind of stuck in a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, he kind of admired their ideological stance, but on the other hand, he would have to punish them, basically. So he couldn't face up to doing either of, like, so he decided to commit suicide, and his wife alongside him. So this is basically just a
Wow.
retelling of him coming home and saying, wife, I'm going to kill myself. And his wife is just, yes, as a good wife of a military officer, I will do the same thing. And, you know, basically they prepare and then, they split their bellies open. And it's, how long is it? What's that? 25 pages, maybe? So it's like, you know, half-hour read. It is, and I'm not a squeamish guy, but this story is just so grueling. I mean, I don't often grimace when I'm reading a story, but I was like, you know, doing this, but it's fucking amazing as well. It's such a good story, such a well-told story. But yeah, reading doesn't often make, you know, it's a kind of different medium from watching like a movie or something with it. You don't often get that reaction while reading, right? Even if it's particularly well described, or but this just I mean, and certainly the highlight of the book. And Mishima Yukio did do a short film version, which weirdly kind of predates those. If you remember that series of fetishized girls seppuku videos that came out in the early 90s.
No.
Yeah, there's like
I do not.
Quite a long series, and each one was basically the only thing that changed. It was a different uniform. So a girl, like either a schoolgirl or a nurse or something, would come out, sit down, expose her breasts, and then split her stomach, or baked, obviously, and they were like 45 minutes long, and they would be, I think they might have been on the Giga label, so they might have, you know, they were on the shelves alongside like scat videos and other fetishes. It's almost like a proto version of one of those like fetishized, you know, ritual suicide, which seems like a very Mishima thing as well. But this short story is terrifying. It's amazing. It's fantastically well written. I highly recommend you read it.
What's the name of the story?
The story is just called
the short story.
Patriotism.
Okay.
Or Yukoku, I think, in Japanese. But beyond just it being a fascinating story in and of itself, it's also just the wider context of the story, the real life story that's based on, and also how it kind of obviously foreshadows, you know, Mishima's own demise. And so the more Mishima I read, the more I'm obsessed with the man, and I'm certainly going to read pretty much everything by him, I think. At least what's been translated. I think most of stuff has been translated. But in recent years as well, some things that have been translated of his that weren't previously translated into English was, so he has the Mishima stuff, but he was also, he wrote kind of like Graham Greene wrote what he called his entertainments, right? Like between period books. Mishima also wrote some books which sound quite interesting, but apparently are more comedic, like one that was translated last year, I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically the plot of the story was a guy who decided that he was going to kill himself, but rather than kill himself, he decided, I'm just going to, my life has no use. I'm just going to hire myself out. I'm going to put an ad in the paper, like, hire me to do anything you want. And then a series of people just hire him, do, you know, and that sounds kind of quite interesting. So he sounds as if his play, I haven't read any of his more kind of playful novels, I suppose, his entertainments, but they sound like they might be interesting as well. So I foresee a lot of Mishima in my future, but the more I read, he's more mysterious to me rather than
less.
It doesn't come into focus.
It's funny because it's, you know, I didn't realize he'd written a story where he kind of drew out at length on disemboweling yourself, but you know, he of course acted it out 1 year before he did it, or even less, because he's in the movie Tenchu with with Katsu Shintaro, and then his character near the end of the movie commits seppuku.
Right.
And what a bizarre thing to do it, you know, on a movie set with fake blood and the rest of it, and then it was like it almost, like you said, it almost was almost a fetishistic act
absolutely
for him. And his wasn't he very close with that really famous trans entertainer in Japan? Sorry?
Peter. No,
not
you mean the one
Peter.
Black Lizard?
Yes,
because he's in Black Lizard as well, isn't he?
Yes,
and
yeah.
In fact, if I'm remembering rightly, isn't the film version, the Fukusaku film version of Black Lizard, isn't it specifically not based so much on the short story? I think it's based on a Mishima play, maybe, that was an adaptation.
I think so, yes.
Right, yeah. Akihiko something, right? I think.
Yes, yeah. Because, you know, she used to appear on Japanese TV all the time when I lived there.
Right.
As kind of, although at that point, like with that kind of long blonde, like almost neon yellow looking hair.
Yes.
As a kind of a talking head.
Yes.
So I mean, it was interesting. Like, again, if he was this kind of like right wing chauvinist type, but then there's also his sexuality seemed to be fluid. I mean, is my understanding of Mishima was that he was.
Yes.
You know, he wasn't exactly.
There's another Mishima movie as well, apart from the Paul Schrader one. Wakamatsu Koji made one.
Okay.
Not that long ago, actually. 11/25. No, is it 11/25? The day he chose his own fate, I think it's called, the English.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's rubbish. It's not very good. I mean, it's interesting just because anything about Mishima is interesting. And of course, it's Wakamatsu Koji. But my main problem was that the guy they got to play Wakamatsu Koji is not, you know, he doesn't look like me, but he's a little flabby.
Okay.
And I was thinking, Mishima would be rolling in his grave, right? Because that's the other thing about Mishima. That was really important to him as well, right? Was being in top physical condition.
Right. Yes. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Anytime you see pictures of him, he's ripped, right? Like,
right.
So I don't think you'd be.
But that's again that kind of almost like body fascism, you know. It's that weird like lifestyle fascism, you know.
So he's such a fascinating. What I mean is that mix as well of admirable and utterly repellent views. Like, if someone else expressed them, you wouldn't have the time of day to listen to it. But coming from him,
right?
Somehow it's like, well, I know you're a very thoughtful guy, so like you've reached, you know, you haven't just reached this because you're an idiot, but
surely he was mentally ill though, right? I mean, surely he must have struggled with.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So that obviously clouds your thinking, right? No matter how smart you are, your brain chemistry is off.
It doesn't seem necessarily that the fate he arrived at. I'm not sure if it was necessarily him being derailed in a way. Like, it seems almost as if, yep, that's where I was heading
for sure.
Anyway. So.
Oh yeah, no.
So again, we don't know, right? And I don't know if anyone knows, even if he knew, right? I mean, but
I can remember talking to students of mine who were probably, you know, who were in their 60s, who remembered the day of hearing the helicopters kind of flying around, like knowing that something was going on the day of his kind of aborted coup. I don't know, wherever it happened in Tokyo must have been close enough to where they lived, where they were kind of
right. Well, it was the self-defense, because it was basically
headquarters.
I'm not sure where
in Tokyo is that though?
I don't know.
Yeah,
or where it is. If it's in the same place now, I don't know. But because apparently they laughed at him, right? From what I understand, they just totally ridiculed. I was going to say the poor guy, but then I thought, well, that's not quite the right phrase either.
The poor guy was
Poor fascist.
Was the guy who he made be his second. That's the guy who.
Right.
The guy whose hands were shaking so badly that he couldn't, like that he made a mess of the, of the job, right? And that's
killed himself afterwards, right? Even though Mishima apparently expressed an interest that he should survive him.
Mm-hmm.
And then apparently someone else involved in that coup was also a very foundational figure in the extreme right wing, today's Japanese extreme right wing.
Right.
Which again, you wonder, would Mishima have been in favor of where that kind of route has gone, or not? It's quite difficult to.
Well, I was quite surprised, and just I don't know how much you know about the Proud Boys, kind of Gavin McGuinness, who's Canadian, but he was one of the founders of Vice magazine, but then kind of wandered off further and further down a kind of a alt-right, far-right kind of pathway. And the Proud Boys are the ones that sort of Trump had said, like, stand by and stand back or whatever, kind of signaling to them, like, be ready when it's time to have our coup. But I remember reading about him and him describing having met some other right-wing figure at this like event they were having somewhere in the US celebrating that right-wing guy who killed I don't know if it was like the famous political assassination in Japan.
Oh yes, some young guy rushed on stage with the sword and yeah.
And I was thinking like the idea that like what amounts to kind of like white supremacist types in the States celebrating Japanese ultranationalism was fascinating to me. That it's almost like the ultra right wing has gotten past race in a way, because some of the other foundational members of this kind of group, it's not so much the kind of like the old school skinhead. It's more now an ideological thing. It is more far right than it is necessarily like, and it's more like it's more
bedfellows, I think
it's
phrase,
weird,
right?
Right. And it's almost like a first world, third world, or like developing world thing now too. It's like it's like they all went to see 300 and took it very seriously. It was just a matter of time before the devil Persians you have to admit, are at our doors.
Both me and my wife came out the theater watching 300, spoiling for a fight.
Immediately joined the local
and the short distance it took us to walk from the theater entrance to the car. We were like, if anyone kicks off now, we're fucking ready.
There you go.
Luckily, no one got in our face.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, no, it is, and along those lines as well. It's fascinating to me how at that time as well there was already this split between student radicals who went left and student radicals who went right.
Yeah,
and they have so much crossover in stuff that they were angry about, or but just went these this is the same time there's as this is going on, there's fucking kids basically hijacking planes to support Palestine. And they grew up in like Ueno or something, and probably went to quite a nice school. Mind-boggling.
What was that movie? Is Kichiku? Is that crazy movie all about that kind of that left-wing almost cult that just descends into complete madness?
That's a great film.
I saw it years and years ago at Cine Muerte Film Festival on the big screen, and it was nice. It left an impression for sure. Anyhow, I think that's probably us done in terms of the books piece.
that's about, yeah, that's, we've actually been talking for close to 3 hours, Nick. So this is gonna need some pruning or a rethink or a reformatting or something. But we've got, anyway, we gave it a go, and I guess we'll
maybe we'll bring 2 books next time. That to begin with, I think, not 4 each.
Yeah, or I mean, or the thing is though, but if anyway, we'll let other people. I'll stop the recording. I'll still be here to talk to you. I'll just have stop the recording. Just just because I think we probably should. So see you next time, maybe, on Literary as Feck. Say bye, Nick.
Take care, everyone.